She did not just slap me for staining her precious sofa. She forged my signature and mortgaged my entire future on that very piece of furniture. But she made one mistake. She forgot that the only person who truly knew this house was my grandfather, and she certainly did not know about the safe hidden behind the fabric she was so obsessed with protecting. My name is Juliet Hart, and tonight was supposed to be a celebration of my 32nd year on this earth. Instead, it felt like a funeral for a life I had spent the last 3 years desperately trying to rebuild. The dining room of our colonial-style home in Maple Creek, Oregon, was staged to perfection, a tableau of middle-class American stability that my stepmother, Elaine, had curated with the precision of a museum curator. The roast chicken in the center of the table was golden brown, the porcelain plates were free of chips, and the linen napkins were folded into crisp, sharp triangles. To an outsider looking through the bay window, we must have looked like the poster family for suburban success, but I worked as a workspace design specialist for Quantiloom Studio, a job that required me to analyze the flow and energy of a room, and from where I sat, the energy in this room was toxic enough to kill the hydrangeas in the centerpiece. I sat at the far end of the table, forcing a smile as my daughter, Emma, bounced in her chair next to me. She was 6 years old, a bright spark of innocent chaos in a house that demanded silence and order. She was the only reason I was here. She was the only reason I had swallowed my pride after the divorce, packed up my meager belongings, and moved back into my father's house. I told myself it was temporary, just a strategic retreat, a way to save money, pay off the legal fees from the custody battle, and build a foundation for us that did not involve living paycheck to paycheck. Happy birthday, Mama, Emma chirped, her voice cutting through the heavy silence that hung over the adults like a thick fog. She clapped her sticky hands together, her eyes wide with the anticipation of sugar. "Thank you, sweetie," I whispered, smoothing her hair. I glanced around the table, taking stock of the people who were supposed to be my support system. My father, Mark, sat at the head of the table. He was a man who wore his authority like a heavy coat he refused to take off, even indoors. He was cutting his meat with aggressive precision, his jaw set tight. He had not looked me in the eye since we sat down. To his right was Elaine, my stepmother. She was a woman who had aged gracefully only because she refused to let her face move enough to form wrinkles. She was sipping her white wine, her eyes scanning the room for imperfections, rather than engaging with the people in it. Next to her was Kelsey, my half-sister, 22 years old and still finding herself, mostly by spending my father's money on trips she called spiritual journeys and clothes she wore once. She was scrolling through her phone under the table, the blue light illuminating a smirk that she did not bother to hide. And in the corner, in his heavy armchair that had been pulled up to the table, was my grandfather, Harold. He was silent, staring at a spot on the tablecloth, seemingly lost in the fog of old age. Most people in the family treated him like a piece of furniture that had outlived its warranty but was too heavy to move. I knew better, or at least, I hoped I did. I took a sip of water, trying to wash down the lump of anxiety in my throat. I just needed peace. I silently bargained with the universe as I looked around the room. Just give me 2 more years. That is all I need. 2 years to clear the debt, get the promotion at Quantiloom, and get Emma into a good school district on my own dime. My gaze drifted to the crystal chandelier hanging above us. It caught the light beautifully, casting prisms on the walls. I paid for that. $2,000. Swiped on my credit card 3 Christmases ago because Elaine said the old one was depressing. I looked down at the hardwood floors, rich oak that gleamed under the light. I paid for the refinishing last summer when my father complained about the scratches. My eyes landed on the living room adjacent to us, specifically the new sectional sofa. It was plush, modern, and cost more than my first car. I was currently making monthly payments of $200 on it because Mark said the house needed to look presentable for his business partners. I owned everything inside this shell, yet I felt like a squatter. "Time for cake," Elaine announced, her voice pitching up into that fake, cheerful register she reserved for company and children. She stood up and went to the kitchen, returning moments later with a cake that looked store-bought but transferred onto a glass platter to pass as homemade. 3 and a 2, 32. They sang. It was a disjointed, lackluster rendition of the birthday song. Mark mumbled the words. Kelsey hummed while texting. Only Emma sang with her whole heart, her voice loud and off-key and perfect. Make a wish, Juliet, Elaine said, her smile tight. I closed my eyes. I wish for a way out. I wish for a home where I do not have to walk on eggshells. I blew out the candles. The smoke drifted up, acrid and gray. The room went silent. Usually, this was the part where someone made a joke about getting older, or we cut the cake, but Mark cleared his throat. It was a sound I knew well. It was the sound of a gavel coming down. Juliet, he said. His voice was not loud, but it was cold. It lacked any warmth, any fatherly affection. It was strictly business, and bad business at that. Yes, Dad? I asked, reaching for the cake knife. Put the knife down, he commanded. I froze, my hand hovering over the frosting. I slowly lowered my hand. Emma stopped swinging her legs, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Mark took a sip of his wine, placed the glass down deliberately, and looked at me with a mixture of disappointment and disgust. We need to talk about your living arrangements. My stomach dropped. Now, Dad, it is my birthday dinner. Can we not? We have been patient, Juliet, he interrupted, his voice rising slightly. We have been incredibly generous. We opened our home to you when you failed at your marriage. We took you in. We let you bring your child here. I didn't fail at my marriage, I said, my voice trembling. He cheated on me, and I pay rent. Dad, I pay for the groceries. I paid for the— You contribute, Elaine interjected smoothly, her hand resting on Mark's arm as if to calm a beast she was actually goading. But let us be honest, dear. It is hardly market rate, and the emotional toll. Having 2 families under one roof, it is simply too much stress on your father. Stress? I looked at Mark. I work 60 hours a week. I stay in my room. I handle all the repairs. How am I causing stress? Mark slammed his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. Emma flinched, shrinking against my side. It is the principle, Juliet, Mark snapped. Look at you, 32 years old, living in your father's house. It is embarrassing. A single mother living off her parents is a disgrace to this family. I have friends asking me why you are still here. They wonder if something is wrong with you. The words hit me like physical blows. Disgrace, embarrassing, wrong. I am staying here to save money so I can move out, I pleaded, trying to keep my voice steady for Emma's sake. That was the plan. You agreed to the plan. Plans change, Mark said coldly. I have decided that it is time you learn to stand on your own 2 feet, really stand on them, without using me as a crutch. He leaned forward, his eyes hard. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. I want you and your daughter out of this house by Sunday evening. The room spun. 48 hours? Dad, you cannot be serious. Where am I supposed to go? I have no deposit saved up for an apartment yet. All my extra money went to the roof repair last month. The roof you asked me to fix. That is not my problem, Mark said, leaning back in his chair. You are an adult. Figure it out. I looked at Elaine. Her face was arranged in a mask of tough love pity, but her eyes were dancing. She was enjoying this. She had wanted me out since the day I moved back in. She wanted her perfect kingdom without the stepdaughter reminder of a previous life. I looked at Kelsey. She covered her mouth with her hand, feigning shock, but I saw the corner of her lips twitch upward. She looked down at her plate, avoiding my gaze, but the smugness radiated off her. But the house, I stammered, desperation clawing at my throat. I have put thousands into this house. The floors, the furniture. Dad, I literally paid for the chair you are sitting on. And you lived here, Mark countered. Consider it rent. The house is in my name. Juliet, legally, you are a guest, and your invitation has expired. Legal. That word hung in the air. He was right. I had been so stupid. I had poured my heart and my bank account into this place because I thought it was family property. I thought I was investing in our collective future. I did not realize I was just a tenant paying for renovations on a landlord's asset. I felt a tug on my sleeve. I looked down. Emma was looking up at me, her eyes wide and filled with tears. "Mommy? Is Grandpa Mark mad at us?" The rage that had been building in my chest suddenly cooled into a sheet of ice. I could not fall apart. Not now. Not in front of her. And certainly not in front of them. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I took a deep breath, pushed my chair back, and stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I locked my knees. "Come on, Emma," I said, my voice deadly calm. I did not look at Mark. I did not look at Elaine. "Let us go get ready for bed." "But the cake," Emma whispered. "We will have cake tomorrow," I promised her, lifting her into my arms. She was getting heavy, but I held her tight, needing the weight to ground me. 48 hours, Juliet," Mark called out as I walked toward the stairs. "Do not make me call the sheriff to escort you out. That would be a scene." I did not reply. I walked up the stairs, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. 48 hours. 48 hours. I brought Emma into our shared bedroom. It was the smallest room in the house, formerly a storage space. We had made it cozy with fairy lights and colorful drawings from her school. But now, the walls felt like they were closing in. "Are we leaving, Mommy?" Emma asked as I helped her into her pajamas. "We might go on an adventure," I lied, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. "A surprise adventure, just you and me." "I like adventures," she said sleepily, climbing into her twin bed. I read her a story, my voice steady and rhythmic, while my mind was screaming, how could they? Why now? Why so sudden? It did not make sense. Yes, Elaine hated me, but they loved my money. I was the one who bought the groceries. I was the one who paid the utility bills when Mark claimed cash flow issues. Kicking me out was not just cruel, it was financially stupid for them. Unless they did not need my money anymore. I sat in the dark long after Emma's breathing evened out into the heavy rhythm of deep sleep. I stared at the ceiling, my anger mixing with a profound sense of betrayal. It wasn't just the eviction, it was the timing. It was the cold, calculated cruelty of doing it on my birthday. It was a power move, a statement. I needed water. My throat was parched from the adrenaline. I slipped out of bed, moving silently across the floorboards I knew by heart. I crept into the hallway. The lights downstairs were dimmed, but voices drifted up the stairwell. I stopped. I should have gone down and confronted them. I should have screamed. But something, an instinct honed by years of living with manipulative people, told me to listen. I crouched down near the banister, peering through the gap between the spindles. From this angle, I could see a slice of the living room. They were all there. Mark, Elaine, and Kelsey. They were sitting on the cream-colored sofa, the sofa I paid for. They were huddled close together, heads bent over a pile of documents on the coffee table. The birthday cake had been pushed aside, forgotten. "Are you sure the 48 hours is enough time?" Elaine asked. Her voice was not loud and screechy like it usually was when she was angry. It was low, conspiratorial. "It has to be," Mark replied, his voice tight. "The bank rep is coming on Tuesday morning for the appraisal. If she is here, if she sees anything, or if she asks questions, the whole thing falls apart." "But what if she refuses to leave?" Kelsey asked. "She is stubborn." "She will leave," Mark said dismissively. "She is scared. She has a kid. She will scramble to find a motel and be out of our hair. We just need the house empty so we can finalize the contract." "And the money?" Elaine whispered, a greedy edge to her tone. "When does the disbursement hit?" 72 hours after signing," Mark said. $200,000. It clears all the debts, and enough left over for that condo in Florida you wanted." My breath hitched in my throat. I pressed a hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. $200,000? My father was taking out a second mortgage? Or selling the house? But he couldn't sell the house that fast. And why would my presence stop a bank appraisal? Unless— I still think it is risky, Kelsey said, twirling a lock of hair. What if she checks her credit report? Or gets mail? I told you. I redirected the mail to the P.O. box, Elaine snapped. And Juliet? Please. She is too busy picking out color swatches and playing victim to look at financial statements. She trusts us. Or at least, she trusts that her daddy wouldn't ruin her. Mark chuckled. It was a dry, soulless sound. She is a good girl. She does what she is told. I pulled back from the banister, my heart hammering so hard I thought they must hear it. This was not about pride. This was not about me being a disgrace. They were doing something with the house, something that required me to be gone, something that involved a massive sum of money in a bank, and the way they spoke about it, the secrecy, the redirection of mail, the fear of me being there for an appraisal. It reeked of fraud. I crept back into my room and closed the door softly. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. The fear had evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. They thought I was weak. They thought I was just a good girl who would cry, pack her bags, and disappear into the night because her daddy told her to. They thought they could use my money to fix up the house, increase its value, and then discard me like trash so they could cash out. I looked over at Emma sleeping peacefully in the dim light. I looked at the boxes of my belongings stacked in the corner, my life packed away, waiting for a permanent home. They wanted me out in 48 hours. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark street of Maple Creek. The reflection in the glass showed a woman with tired eyes, but a set jaw. Mark was right about one thing. I was an adult now, and adults did not just run away. Adults fought back. They were plotting on the very sofa I bought, in the house I maintained, planning to steal a future I had worked myself to the bone to secure. I whispered to the reflection in the glass, the words barely a breath but heavy with promise. If they want a war, they chose the wrong person. The house was finally silent, but the air still felt heavy, charged with the static electricity of the secrets I had just overheard from the top of the stairs. I waited until I was certain that Mark and Elaine had retreated to their master suite and Kelsey had shut her door before I dared to creep back down. I needed to see it. I needed to stand in that living room, alone, and look at the centerpiece of this domestic war zone. The moonlight filtered in through the bay windows, casting long, pale rectangles across the hardwood floor I had paid to refinish, and there it sat, the sofa. It was a sectional, upholstered in a fabric the color of heavy cream, textured and expensive. In the dark, it looked like a sleeping beast, massive and immovable. I walked toward it, my bare feet making no sound. I ran my hand along the backrest, feeling the weave of the fabric under my fingertips. To anyone else, it was just a piece of furniture, a place to sit, to watch television, to nap on a Sunday afternoon. But to me, this sofa was a monument. It was the altar upon which my dignity had been sacrificed 7 years ago. That was the day the first crack appeared, not in the foundation of the house, but in the foundation of my soul. I was 25 then. I had just moved back to Maple Creek after graduating from design school, full of naive optimism and a desperate need for approval. My mother had passed away a few years prior, and Mark had recently married Elaine. I wanted to like her. I wanted us to be a family. I did not realize then that Elaine did not want a family. She wanted an audience. She was obsessed with the concept of the perfect American household. She treated the house not as a home, but as a stage set for a play where she was the star and the director. And her first major executive decision as the lady of the house was the purchase of this sofa. I remember the day it arrived. It cost $3,000. Elaine had made a show of the delivery, directing the movers with the imperious hand gestures of a traffic cop. Careful, she had snapped at a burly man sweating under the weight of the corner piece. That is Belgian linen. It is the color of purity. It is the only thing in this house that is absolutely forbidden to get dirty. She had looked at me when she said it, not at Mark, not at Kelsey, at me. A week later, the incident happened. It was a Tuesday evening. I was working from a makeshift desk in the corner of the dining room, trying to launch my freelance career. I had finally landed a potential contract with a boutique hotel downtown, my first real client. The phone rang, and I saw the area code. It was them. My heart leaped into my throat. I jumped up, grabbing my notebook with one hand and my glass of red wine with the other, a stupid, careless mistake born of excitement. I hurried toward the foyer where the reception was better, my eyes fixed on the phone screen, my mind already rehearsing my professional greeting. I did not see the edge of the Persian rug that Elaine had insisted on angling just so. My toe caught. The world tilted. I stumbled forward, flailing to regain my balance. The notebook flew from my hand. The wineglass did not. It stayed in my grip just long enough to launch its contents in a perfect, horrifying arc as I fell. Time seemed to slow down. I watched, helpless, as the dark crimson liquid splashed across the pristine, cream-colored armrest of the new sofa. It soaked in instantly, a violent, bloody bloom on a field of snow. The glass shattered on the floor, but the sound of breaking glass was nothing compared to the silence that followed. I scrambled to my knees, gasping, my hands hovering over the stain as if I could magically pull the liquid back out. "Oh God," I whispered. "Oh God, no." "What did you do?" The voice was low, trembling with a rage so pure it felt cold. I looked up. Elaine stood in the doorway of the kitchen. She was wiping her hands on a dish towel, her eyes wide, fixed on the stain. "I slipped," I stammered, tears already stinging my eyes. "Elaine, I am so sorry. I tripped on the rug. I will fix it. I will pay for it to be cleaned. I promise." She did not hear me, or she did not care. She crossed the room in 3 long strides. She did not look like the polished, suburban stepmother I had been trying to bond with. She looked feral. "You ruin everything," she hissed. Before I could stand, she was on me. She grabbed my shoulders, her fingernails digging into my flesh through my thin cotton shirt. She shoved me backward. I lost my balance again and fell onto the sofa, right next to the stain. "Elaine, stop!" I cried out, shock paralyzing me more than fear. I was 25 years old. I was an adult woman. Adults did not get shoved by their parents. "Look at it!" she screamed, her face inches from mine. Spittle flew from her mouth, landing on my cheek. "Look at what you did, you clumsy, ungrateful parasite. I told you this was the one thing to keep clean." She pressed her hand against my chest, pinning me down against the cushions. It was not a fight. It was a domination. I was too stunned to fight back. I lay there, feeling the rough texture of the linen against the back of my neck, smelling the metallic tang of the spilled wine and the cloying scent of Elaine's expensive perfume. "You did this on purpose," she seethed, her weight pressing the air out of my lungs. "You could not stand to see something nice in this house that was not about you. You had to mark it. You had to destroy it." "No," I sobbed, the humiliation burning hotter than the physical pain. "It was an accident." "You are the accident," she roared. I looked frantically toward the kitchen archway. Mark was standing there. My father. He held a can of beer in one hand, the condensation dripping down his fingers. He was watching. He saw his wife pinning his grown daughter to the couch, screaming abuse into her face. "Dad?" I choked out. "Dad, please." Mark looked at me. Then he looked at the stain on the sofa. He took a slow sip of his beer, his eyes shifting away to look at the television that was playing silently in the corner. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply checked out, leaving me to the wolves. To my left, I saw movement. Kelsey, who was 15 then, was standing by the stairs. She was holding her phone up. The camera lens was pointed right at us. I thought, for one desperate second, that she was documenting this to help me, to show someone how crazy her mother was. But then she lowered the phone, her thumb tapping the screen. I saw the light of the delete button flash. She bit her lip, looking terrified. Not for me, but for herself. She did not want to be part of the narrative. She deleted the evidence because she knew that in this house, truth was dangerous. Elaine finally let go of me, shoving me one last time for good measure. She stood up, smoothing her blouse, her chest heaving. "Get out of my sight," she said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "And do not think for 1 second that you are not paying for this. You will pay for every thread." I scrambled off the sofa, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. I ran to the kitchen to get towels, club soda, anything to lift the stain, but the damage was done. The wine had set. The sofa was scarred. But the real scar was not on the furniture. Later that night, after hours of scrubbing until my knuckles were raw, and the stain had faded to a stubborn, brownish shadow, I sat on the floor in the dark, exhausted and hollowed out. I felt a presence behind me. I turned to see Grandpa Harold. He was standing in the doorway, leaning heavily on his cane. He was 7 years younger then, his mind still sharp as a tack. Though he often played the role of the silent observer, he had been in his armchair in the corner during the entire scene. He had seen the shove. He had seen Mark turn away. He had seen Kelsey's phone. He shuffled over to the sofa and sat down slowly, right next to the damp spot where I had been scrubbing. He looked at the stain. Then he looked at me. "I am sorry, Grandpa," I whispered, my voice hoarse from crying. "I ruined the room." Harold reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder. His grip was frail but warm. "Do not apologize for a stain, Juliet," he said softly. His voice was gravelly, worn by years of silence. "It is just wine. It washes out, or you cover it up." He tapped the cushion with his cane. "There are dirtier things in this house than a bit of Merlot," he said. "There are stains that people are trying very hard to hide, and they are not on the furniture." I looked at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" He shook his head, his eyes sad and incredibly old. "Just remember this feeling. Juliet, remember how they looked at you tonight. They showed you who they are. Believe them." He stood up with a groan and made his way back to his room, leaving me alone with his cryptic warning. I did not understand him then. I thought he was just being comforting. I thought he meant that family drama was the dirty thing. In the weeks that followed, Elaine presented me with a bill, not for a cleaning service, but for a complete reupholstery of the entire sectional, $600. It was nearly all the money I had in my savings account at the time. "It is only fair," Mark had told me when I tried to argue that a cleaning would suffice. "You damaged property, you take responsibility. That is how the real world works, Juliet." I paid it. I wrote the check with a trembling hand, handing over my security to buy back my peace. But it did not stop there. Once I had paid for the sofa, a precedent was set. I became the wallet of last resort. When the dishwasher broke a month later, Elaine sighed and said, "Well, we wouldn't have run it so often if Juliet wasn't living here." I paid for the repair. When the deck needed staining, it was implied that my foot traffic had worn it down. I paid for the supplies. For 7 years, that sofa stood as a silent contract. I paid to be here. I paid to be tolerated. And every time I walked into this room, I saw the ghost of that wine stain, and I felt the phantom weight of Elaine's hands on my chest, pinning me down, reminding me of my place. Back in the present, I pulled my hand away from the fabric. I looked down at the spot near the armrest. Even after the reupholstery, even after 7 years, if you looked closely under the moonlight, you could see a faint variation in the texture, a memory of violence woven into the threads. I realized then that Grandpa Harold had been right. The stain wasn't the problem. The problem was that they had used a simple accident to break me. They had used my guilt to turn me into a servant in my own home. But as I stood there in the dark, listening to the house settle, I remembered the other part of tonight's revelation. They were planning to refinance. They were planning to take more. I looked at the cushion where Grandpa had sat that night. There are dirtier things being hidden. My eyes drifted to the back of the sofa, to the seam that ran along the heavy backrest. It looked seamless, perfect, but Grandpa knew this house better than anyone. He knew things Mark and Elaine were too busy posing to notice. "Okay, Grandpa," I whispered to the empty room. I am listening now. I touched the faint scar on the fabric one last time. It no longer felt like a mark of shame. It felt like a point of origin. This was where they taught me to be afraid. This was where they taught me to pay for my existence. But fear turns to anger if you hold it long enough, and I had been holding it for 7 years. I turned away from the sofa and headed back toward the stairs. The 48-hour clock was ticking. Mark thought he had given me a deadline to surrender. He was wrong. He had given me a deadline to attack. The morning sun that streamed through the window of my makeshift office in the corner of the bedroom did not bring clarity. It brought a harsh, exposing light to the financial autopsy I was performing on my own life. I sat on the edge of the bed, my laptop balanced precariously on my knees, staring at a spreadsheet that I'd been too afraid to compile until now. The numbers on the screen were not just digits. They were hours of my life. They were weekends I had worked overtime at Quantaloom's studio. They were the ballet lessons I had told Emma we could not afford yet. I scrolled down the column labeled Household Contributions. 3 months ago, I had transferred $4,500 to my father's account for emergency roof repairs. Mark had stood in the kitchen, wringing his hands, talking about water damage and structural integrity. He had promised to pay me back when his quarterly bonus came in. It never did. 6 months ago, it was $2,000 for a new water heater. Every month, without fail, I transferred $1,200 for room and board. I did the math in my head. Over the last 3 years, I had poured nearly $40,000 into a house that, on paper, did not belong to me. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of nausea. How had I been so blind? I knew the answer. I had been blinded by the desperate need for a safety net. When I moved back after the divorce, I felt like a failure. I was vulnerable, and Elaine, with her shark-like instinct for blood in the water, had spun a narrative that I wanted to believe. I remembered the conversation vividly. We were sitting on the back porch, sipping iced tea. Elaine had patted my hand, her skin dry and cool. "We are so glad to have you back, Juliet," she had said. "And do not worry about the deed or the mortgage. Your father believes in tradition. The man holds the property. But you know how much he loves you. When the time comes, this house will be yours and Kelsey's. Whatever you put into it now is just investing in your own inheritance." Investing in my inheritance. That phrase had been the tranquilizer that kept me docile while they bled me dry. I opened a new tab on my browser and logged into my email. I went straight to the trash folder. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I had a habit of deleting anything that looked like spam without opening it, usually at Elaine's urging. She was always warning me about phishing scams and identity thieves. "It is just junk. Juliet, do not even open it. It attracts viruses," she would say whenever I mentioned a weird notification. I scrolled past the ads for shoe sales and miracle diets until I found it. An email from First National Bank of Oregon. The subject line was vague. "Important update regarding your loan inquiry." My heart hammered against my ribs. I did not have a loan with First National. My car was paid off. My student loans were with a federal provider. I clicked on it. "Dear customer, this is a reminder that we still require the secondary signature verification to finalize the adjustment on the home equity line of credit ending in 449. I stared at the screen. Home equity line of credit. HELOC. They were trying to borrow against the equity of the house, but why was the bank emailing me? Unless my email address was listed on the application, or unless my name was somehow attached to the title without my knowledge, but that was impossible. You cannot be put on a deed without signing mountains of paperwork in front of a notary. I checked the date of the email. It was sent 3 days ago. I slammed the laptop shut. The silence in the room felt suffocating. I needed water. I needed to breathe. I walked out of the room and headed for the stairs. As I reached the landing, I heard a voice coming from the kitchen. It was Kelsey. I know, she was saying, her voice low and hurried. But 48 hours is so tight. What if the wire transfer does not clear in time for the first payment? I froze on the second step. "Yeah, well, she is still here," Kelsey continued, her tone shifting to one of annoyance. She is packing, I think, but if she sees the inspector, yeah, no, she does not suspect a thing. She thinks Dad is just being a hard-ass about the rent. A pause.
Okay, I will tell Mom. Yeah, bye.
I gripped the banister. First payment. Inspector. She doesn't suspect. I forced my face into a mask of neutrality and descended the stairs, making sure to step heavily on the squeaky board near the bottom so I would not appear to be sneaking. When I walked into the kitchen, Kelsey jumped. She was leaning against the granite island, granite I had paid for 2 years ago, and she practically threw her phone onto the counter. "Jesus, Juliet!" she exclaimed, her hand flying to her chest. "You scared me." "Sorry," I said, walking past her to the refrigerator. "I just came down for some water. Who were you talking to?" "No one," she said too quickly. "Just a friend. About a trip. We are planning a trip to Cabo." "Cabo," I repeated, pouring water into a glass. "That sounds expensive." "I have been saving," she said defensively. She grabbed her phone and slid it into the back pocket of her jeans. "Are you? Have you started packing? Dad is really serious about Sunday." "I know he is," I said, taking a sip. "Kelsey, is there something going on with the house, aside from Dad kicking me out?" Her eyes flickered away from mine. She looked at the floor, then at the window, anywhere but at me. "What? No. What would be going on? Dad just wants his space back. You know how he gets." She was lying. I could see the pulse fluttering in her neck. "Right," I said. "His space." I left the kitchen before I lost my temper. I found Mark in the living room. He was sitting on the cream-colored sofa, watching a golf tournament with the volume turned low. He didn't look up when I entered. "Dad," I said, "if you are not telling me you have found an apartment, I do not want to hear it," he grumbled, his eyes fixed on the screen. "I am looking," I lied. "But I have a question. I got a weird email from First National Bank about a loan." Mark went still. It was subtle, but I saw it. His hand tightened around the remote control. For a second, the only movement in the room was the flickering light of the television reflecting in his glasses. "Spam," he said gruffly. "I told you, Juliet, the internet is full of scams." It had the last 3 digits of a loan number, I pressed, and it mentioned a home equity line. Mark finally looked at me. His face was flushed, angry. "Are you interrogating me about my finances? In my own house?" "I am asking because they emailed me," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the shaking in my knees. "Dad, are you taking out another loan on the house? Because if you are, and you are kicking me out because of it—" "The interest rates on my credit cards have skyrocketed," he snapped. Standing up, he towered over me, using his height to intimidate. "I have to shuffle some things around. It is standard financial management. Not that you would understand, seeing as you had to come crawling back here with nothing." "I did not come back with nothing," I said, feeling the sting of his words but refusing to back down. "I came back with a job, and I have put thousands into this place. If you are refinancing, does that mean you have equity? Because some of that value came from my paycheck." "You paid rent," Mark shouted. "You paid for the privilege of a roof over your head. You own nothing here. Juliet, nothing." "Mark, settle down." Elaine's voice drifted in from the hallway. She glided into the room, wearing a silk robe, looking every inch the calm matriarch diffusing a toddler's tantrum. She walked over to Mark and placed a soothing hand on his shoulder, but her eyes were fixed on me. They were cold, calculating eyes. "Juliet," she said softly, "why are you upsetting your father? His blood pressure is already through the roof." "I am just trying to understand why I am being evicted on 48 hours' notice while you guys are talking about bank loans and inspectors," I said. Elaine sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "We are doing this to save the house. Juliet, things have been tight. Your father made some investments that did not pan out. If we do not restructure our finances, the bank could take everything. Do you want that? Do you want this house to be foreclosed on? Do you want Emma to be on the street?" The logic twisted in my brain. If the house is in danger of foreclosure, I said slowly, why does kicking me out help? I am the only one paying you steady money every month. If I leave, you lose $1,200 a month. How does that satisfy the bank? Elaine's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. The bank requires certain conditions for the restructuring. Occupancy limits. It is complicated legal jargon. You would not understand. Try me, I said. I read contracts for a living. Enough, Mark roared. You have your deadline, Sunday, sunset, or I call the sheriff and have you removed for trespassing. End of discussion. He turned his back on me and turned the volume up on the television. Elaine gave me a pitying look, shook her head, and followed him back to the sofa, sitting close to him, whispering something in his ear. I walked away. My legs felt like lead. They were lying. The occupancy limit excuse was garbage. Banks do not care how many family members live in a house as long as the mortgage is paid. In fact, having a tenant usually helps with loan approval because it counts as income. Unless they weren't declaring me as a tenant, unless they were declaring the house as something else, or... I went back to my room and locked the door. My mind was racing, connecting dots I had been too afraid to join before. The email from the bank required a secondary signature verification. Secondary signature. I sat down at my desk and began to rummage through the bottom drawer. This was where I kept all the random paperwork from the last 3 years. Receipts, tax forms, medical bills for Emma. I was looking for something specific. I remembered a day, about 8 months ago, Mark had come to me, smiling, which was rare. He said he was applying for a new insurance policy for the roof I had paid to fix. He said the insurance company needed to verify that the work was done by a resident. He had handed me a tablet. Just sign here. Honey, it is digital. Saves paper. I had signed. And then there was the time Elaine needed me to sign for a package because she was in the shower. I signed a digital pad held by a delivery guy I didn't recognize. And the time Mark asked me to sign a blank sheet of paper because he wanted to scan my signature to authorize the contractors to enter my room while I was at work. I froze, my hand deep in the drawer. Scan my signature. I pulled out a folder labeled House Receipts. I flipped through it until I found an old invoice from the roofing company. Attached to it was a piece of paper. It was a liability waiver. At the bottom was my signature. But when I looked closely, holding it up to the window light, something looked off. The ink of the signature was perfectly flat. It didn't have the indentation of a pen. It was printed. I grabbed a magnifying glass from my sewing kit, another relic of my attempts to be useful in this house. I peered at the signature. It was pixelated at the edges. It was a high-resolution copy. My stomach dropped all the way to the floor. Mark had a high-end scanner in his office. He used it for his consulting business. If they had my signature on file, if they had a digital copy of it, they could paste it onto anything, a loan application, a deed transfer, a co-signing agreement. The email from the bank made sense now. Secondary signature verification. The bank had flagged something. Maybe the signature on the document didn't perfectly match a previous one, or maybe it was just a random audit. That was why they needed me out. If the bank inspector came and asked me, Ms. Hart, did you sign this document pledging your assets as collateral? And I said no. Their entire scheme would crumble. But if I was gone, if I was kicked out and unreachable, Mark could intercept the mail, meet the inspector, and smooth it all over. Oh, Juliet? She moved out, but she signed everything before she left. I looked at the paper in my hand, my own name, forged by the people who were supposed to protect me. Elaine's threat echoed in my mind. Do you want Emma to be homeless? They weren't just stealing my money. They were stealing my identity. They were leveraging my credit, my future, to fund their lifestyle, and they were discarding me before the bill came due. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I was not just dealing with a toxic family, I was dealing with criminals. I looked at the clock. It was 1 p.m. on Saturday. I had 29 hours left before the deadline. I could not confront them again, not yet. If I showed them I knew about the forgery, they would panic, and desperate people do dangerous things. Mark was already volatile. If he thought I could send him to prison, what would he do? I needed to be smart. I needed to be colder than they were. I grabbed my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Marissa Cole. We had gone to design school together, but while I went into interiors, Marissa had realized she hated drawing and loved arguing. She had switched to law, passed the bar on her first try, and was now working at a firm in Portland that specialized in civil litigation. I hesitated. Calling her meant making this real. It meant admitting that my father was a thief and my stepmother was a monster. It meant declaring war. I looked at the photo of Emma on my desk. She was smiling, missing a front tooth, holding a flower she had picked from the garden. For her? I pressed the call button. Hello? Marissa's voice was sharp, professional. Marissa, I said, my voice shaking. It is Juliet. I need help. I think my family is trying to frame me for a mortgage fraud. There was a silence on the other end. Then, the professional edge dropped, replaced by the fierce loyalty of an old friend. Start from the beginning, she said, and do not leave anything out. I locked the bedroom door and sat on the floor of the closet, surrounded by the smell of my own anxiety and the faint scent of cedar. I propped my phone up against a stack of shoeboxes and hit the FaceTime icon. The ringing sound seemed deafening in the silence of the room. 1 ring, 2 rings. Marissa Cole answered on the third. Her face filled the screen, framed by a sleek bob cut and the background of a minimalist office that screamed billable hours. She was wearing a sharp black blazer, and even though it was a Saturday afternoon, she looked like she was ready to cross-examine a hostile witness. Juliet, she said, her voice clipping the syllables. You look like you are hiding from a serial killer. What is wrong? I might be, I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. Or at least, I am hiding from my family. Marissa, they are kicking me out. They gave me 48 hours to vacate. Marissa's eyebrows shot up. 48 hours? That is illegal in Oregon. You have established residency. They have to give you 30 days notice minimum. Usually 60 if you have been there over a year. Did they serve you formal papers? No papers, I said. Just a verbal threat from my dad at the dinner table. But that is not the worst part. Marissa, I think they are trying to refinance the house using my name. I found a printed signature of mine on an old invoice, and the bank emailed me about a secondary signature verification for a home equity line of credit. Marissa went still. The casual concern on her face hardened into professional focus. She leaned closer to the camera. Say that again, slowly. I explained everything. The email from First National, the conversation I overheard about the inspector coming on Tuesday, the redirected mail, the threats about foreclosure if I did not leave, the pixelated signature on the roofing invoice. When I finished, Marissa did not look shocked. She looked angry. Okay, she said, her voice low and dangerous. Listen to me very carefully. Juliet, do not panic, and whatever you do not leave that house. But Mark said he would call the sheriff, I argued, my hands trembling. Let him call, Marissa countered. The sheriff will take one look at your driver's license, which lists that address, and tell your father it is a civil matter. He cannot kick you out without a court order. But if you leave voluntarily, if you pack your bags and walk out that door, you lose possession. You make it infinitely harder to prove you had a right to be there. And more importantly, if you leave, you give them exactly what they want, an empty stage to perform their fraud. Fraud, I repeated the word. It tasted like ash. It is mortgage fraud, Juliet, Marissa said bluntly. It sounds like a classic scheme. They forge your signature to get a loan because your credit is likely better than theirs, or because they need a co-signer to bolster the equity, but the bank needs to verify the occupant. If the appraiser shows up and you are there, and you say, wait, I did not authorize this, the whole thing blows up. That is why they need you gone by Sunday. They need to scrub the house of your existence before the bank rep walks in on Tuesday morning. I felt cold. So what do I do? You stay, she commanded. You act like a ghost. You do not argue. You do not scream. You just exist. And you record everything. Oregon is a one-party consent state for recording in-person conversations, provided you are part of the conversation. But to be safe, focus on documenting. Take photos of that invoice with the fake signature. Forward me that email from the bank. Dig through every drawer in your room. If there is any mail with your name on it, secure it. We need to build a paper trail that proves two things. 1, you live there, and 2, they are lying to a federally insured financial institution. She paused, her eyes softening slightly. And Juliet? You are going to need a lawyer, a real one, not just a friend on a phone. I cannot afford a retainer. Marissa, you know that. Every cent I have went into this house. I am taking the case, she said, pro bono, because I hate bullies, and I really hate it when parents eat their young. Tears pricked my eyes. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, she warned. This is going to get ugly. They are going to escalate when they realize you are not leaving. Be ready, keep Emma close, and keep your phone charged. We hung up, and I sat there for a moment, drawing strength from her certainty. I was not just a daughter being scolded anymore. I was a client. I had legal standing. I wiped my face and stood up. I needed to get out of the closet. I needed to act normal. I walked downstairs, my feet silent on the carpet runner. The house was quiet. Mark and Elaine had gone out, probably to spend money they did not have yet, and Kelsey was nowhere to be seen. I went into the kitchen, the heart of the house. It looked so benign with its yellow curtains and the smell of lemon pledge. I decided to make tea. It was a ritual, something to steady my hands. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. Earl Grey, a voice said from the corner. 2 sugars, no milk. I jumped, nearly dropping the mug. Grandpa Harold was sitting at the small breakfast table by the window. I had not seen him there. He blended into the shadows, wearing his faded gray cardigan and staring out at the bird feeder. Grandpa, I breathed, pressing a hand to my chest. I did not know you were awake. I am always awake, he rumbled. People just assume I'm asleep because it is easier than talking to me. I looked at him. Usually, Harold was distant, answering questions with vague nods, or mumbling about the weather in 1974. We all assumed the dementia was creeping in, a slow tide eroding the shores of his memory. I fixed his tea just the way he liked it and brought it over, sitting across from him. He took the mug with a hand that was spotted with age but surprisingly steady. He took a sip, then set it down and looked me dead in the eye. The fog was gone. His eyes, usually watery and drifting, were sharp, clear. They were the eyes of the man who had built this family's wealth before Mark squandered it. You are worried about the money, he stated. It was not a question. I am worried about everything, Grandpa, I sighed, deciding not to burden him with the details. Mark wants me to leave. He says I am a drain on the finances. Harold scoffed. It was a harsh, barking sound. Mark, that boy has not earned an honest dollar since 1998. He only knows how to borrow. He borrows against the house. He borrows against his life insurance. He would borrow against his own soul if the devil offered a low interest rate. I stared at him. Grandpa? He tapped a finger on the table. And Elaine, she only knows how to spend. She thinks buying things makes her a better person. She fills this house with expensive junk because she is empty inside. But you, Juliet. He reached out and covered my hand with his. His skin felt like dry parchment paper. You are the only one who pays, he said. $4,500 for the roof repair last October. $2,300 for the plumbing in the master bath the year before. $1,200 a month for rent since you moved back. My mouth fell open. How do you know those exact numbers? I listen, he said simply. I sit in my chair, and I listen. They talk like I am a piece of upholstery. They talk about the debts. They talk about the schemes. They think because I walk slow. My brain is slow. But I count. Juliet. I have always been good at counting. He leaned back, taking another sip of tea. I remember the day you brought Emma home. It was a Tuesday. It was raining. You were wearing a yellow raincoat. You looked terrified. But you paid for your own groceries that very first week. I saw the receipt you left on the counter. $89.14. I felt a lump form in my throat. He had seen, all this time. While I felt invisible and used, he had been watching. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked. "Because you were not ready," he said. "You were still trying to please them. You were still trying to buy their love. It is a bad investment. Juliet, the return on investment with Mark and Elaine is 0. Actually, it is negative." He looked toward the living room, his gaze piercing through the wall. "It started 7 years ago," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The day of the wine. The day she pushed you down on that sofa." I flinched. "I remember." "I told you then," he said. "There are dirtier things than wine. That was the day I realized they would eat you alive if they could. That was the day I started my collection." "Collection?" I asked. "Paper," he said. "Receipts they threw away. Letters from the bank they thought they shredded but only tore in half. Notes Elaine wrote to herself. I have been picking up the crumbs they drop. For 7 years." My heart began to race. "Grandpa, where is it? Where are these papers?" He smiled, a small, mischievous quirk of his lips that made him look 40 years younger. "In a safe place, a place they look at every single day but never see, because they are blinded by their own vanity." He stood up slowly, groaning as his knees took his weight. He picked up his cane and motioned for me to follow him. We walked into the living room. The afternoon sun was hitting the cream-colored sofa, making it glow. Harold stopped in front of it. He looked at it with a mixture of disgust and triumph. "She loves this sofa," he said softly. "She thinks it is the throne of her little kingdom. She does not know it is actually her coffin." I looked at the sofa. It was just furniture. Expensive, pretentious furniture. "I do not understand," I said. Harold turned to me. He looked serious now. The playful spark was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. "If they try to hurt you, Juliet," he said, "if they try to touch Emma, if they try to throw you out on the street, we will open it." "Open what?" I asked, looking at the smooth fabric. "The truth," he said. "It is right there, under the surface, just like the rot in this family." He tapped the back of the sofa with his cane, right near the seam I had touched the night before. "Do not leave this house, Juliet," he commanded, echoing Marissa's words from earlier. "Stand your ground. You have allies. You have the law on that phone of yours. And you have me." He turned and shuffled toward his bedroom on the ground floor. "I'm going to take a nap now. Wake me for dinner. And Juliet?"
"Yes, Grandpa?"
"Make sure you record the conversation tonight," he said without turning around. "Mark tends to lie when he drinks scotch, and he always drinks scotch on Saturdays." I stood alone in the living room, staring at the sofa. For the first time in 3 years, the crushing weight on my chest lightened. I wasn't just a victim waiting to be evicted. I was part of a team. I had a shark of a lawyer in my pocket, and I had a spy in the living room. I looked at the sofa again. "We will open it." I didn't know how. I didn't know what was inside, but I knew one thing for certain. The piece of furniture that had been the symbol of my oppression was about to become the instrument of my liberation. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. "Let them come." I went back upstairs, not to pack, but to prepare. I checked the battery on my phone. 98%. I was ready. The sound of the garage door grinding shut was the most beautiful noise I had heard all day. I stood by the window in the living room, watching through the sheer curtains as Elaine's silver sedan backed out of the driveway. Kelsey was in the passenger seat, checking her makeup in the visor mirror. They were heading to the mall, a Saturday ritual that Elaine claimed was therapeutic, but was actually just another way to hemorrhage money we apparently did not have. Mark had taken his golf clubs and left an hour earlier, muttering about a tea time he probably could not afford either. The house was empty, save for Grandpa Harold napping in his room, and Emma playing quietly with her dolls in the backyard. I was alone. I had maybe 2 hours. I did not waste a second. I turned on my heel and marched toward Mark's home office. The door was shut. It was always shut. Growing up, this room was the sanctuary. We were not allowed to enter unless summoned. It smelled of old paper, cheap scotch, and my father's desperate attempts to project an image of importance. I turned the knob. Locked. Of course. But I knew this house. I knew that the lock on this door was a flimsy interior privacy lock, easily defeated by a flathead screwdriver or, in a pinch, a stiff credit card. I did not have a card on me, but I had a nail file in my pocket. I slid the metal tip into the mechanism, wiggled it once, twice, and felt the tumblers catch. A soft click echoed in the hallway. I pushed the door open and slipped inside, closing it softly behind me. The room was dim, the blinds drawn tight against the afternoon sun. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that cut through the gloom. I stood still for a moment, letting my eyes adjust, but more importantly, letting my professional brain take over. I am a workspace design specialist. My job is not just about picking colors or ergonomic chairs. It is about behavior. I study how people move through a space, where they reach, what they avoid, and where their habits leave physical traces on the environment. A room tells a story about its occupant, usually a story they do not realize they are writing. I scanned the room. Mark's desk was a heavy mahogany beast, cluttered with stacks of papers that looked important, but were likely just junk mail he hadn't sorted. To the untrained eye, it looked like the workspace of a busy executive. To me, it looked like a stage set. I walked around the desk. I did not start pulling drawers open at random. That is how amateurs get caught. Instead, I looked for the anomalies. The carpet. The pile of the rug was worn down in a specific arc behind the chair, typical of swivel movement, but there was another wear pattern, fainter but distinct, leading not to the door, but to the heavy filing cabinet in the corner. I moved to the cabinet. It was a 4-drawer vertical unit, metal painted to look like wood. I knelt down. Humans are creatures of least resistance. We store the things we use most often at waist height. We store the things we want to forget at the bottom, but we store the things we want to hide, but need quick access to, in the spots that feel clever, but are actually predictable. I looked at the handles. The brass finish on the handle of the 3rd drawer was slightly more tarnished than the others. The oil from human fingers degrades the lacquer over time. Mark had been opening this drawer a lot more than the others. I pulled it open. It was full of old tax returns from the 90s. Boring, useless, a perfect decoy. But the depth was wrong. I tapped the back of the drawer. It sounded hollow, but the metallic thud was too short. The drawer did not extend as far back as the cabinet casing allowed. There was a false back, or simply a gap. I reached in, past the hanging folders, and felt around the back of the metal track. My fingers brushed against a thick manila envelope taped to the underside of the drawer above it. "Got you," I whispered. I peeled the tape back carefully, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The envelope fell into my hand. It was heavy. I moved to the desk, cleared a small space, and dumped the contents. My breath hitched. It was like looking at a biography of a stranger who shared my name. The first document was a letter from First National Bank, dated 2 months ago. "Dear Ms. Hart, we are pleased to inform you that your application for a home equity line of credit in the amount of $40,000 has been conditionally approved, pending final property appraisal." $40,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. They hadn't just applied. They had been approved, and the letter was addressed to Ms. Juliet Hart, not Mark, me. I dug deeper. There were bank statements for an account I had never opened. The account number ended in 449. The same digits from the email I had seen. I scanned the transaction history. The initial disbursement of $10,000 had hit the account 6 weeks ago. Where did it go? I flipped the page. A transfer of $9,800 to a joint account held by Mark and Elaine Hart. And then, the spending. There were printouts of receipts stapled to the statement. A deposit of $3,000 to Prestige Motors. I closed my eyes for a second, fighting the wave of nausea. Elaine had been talking about getting a new car for months. She wanted a convertible. They were buying a luxury car with a loan taken out in my name, secured by the house I lived in. But how? How did they pull this off without me stepping foot in a bank? I found the answer at the bottom of the pile. It was a copy of the loan agreement. On the signature line, in blue ink, was Juliet Hart. I stared at it. The room seemed to spin. It was my signature. It had the same loop on the J, the same sharp cross on the T. If I were a bank teller glancing at this, I would never question it. But I was a designer. I worked with lines and vectors all day. I pulled my phone out and switched to the camera. I zoomed in on the signature through the lens, using the maximum magnification. There it was. The edges of the ink were too smooth. There was no variation in pressure. When you write with a pen, the line thins on the upstroke and thickens on the downstroke. This line was uniform. It was a trace, a high-quality, masterful trace, likely done using a light box or a projection, then inked over by a steady hand. Or worse. I remembered the digital waiver Mark had made me sign for the roofers, the one on the tablet. I took photos of everything, the letter, the account number, the transfer history, the car deposit receipt, and the forged contract. My hands were shaking, but the camera's stabilizer did its job. I hit send on the message thread with Marissa. 30 seconds later, my phone buzzed. Marissa. Holy hell. Juliet, this is professional grade. The spacing is identical to the sample you sent me earlier. It is a digital lift. They captured your signature from that tablet, vectorized it, and printed it, or they used a robotic pen plotter. Either way, this is a felony, a major felony. I typed back, there is $40,000 already gone. They spent it on a car. Marissa, keep digging. We need proof of intent. We need something that shows they knew exactly what they were doing. Right now. They could claim you signed it while drunk or tired and forgot. We need the smoking gun. I put the phone down and looked at the pile again. What was I missing? I picked up a small, crumpled piece of notepad paper that had been stuck to the back of the bank statement. It was Elaine's stationery, cream paper with a gold-embossed E at the top. The handwriting was jagged, rushed, Elaine's handwriting. Bank rep called again, wants to verify occupancy before releasing the second tranche of $30,000. Must kick the brat out before Tuesday. If she is here when they come, she will talk. Tell her it is about the lease. Make something up. Just get her out. I read it twice. Must kick the brat out. The cruelty of it did not hurt me, not anymore. What hurt was the cold, calculated logic. I wasn't a daughter to them. I wasn't even a person. I was an obstacle. I was a glitch in their get-rich-quick scheme that needed to be patched out. They were going to take another $30,000. That would bring the total debt to $70,000. A debt that would be attached to my credit score for the rest of my life. A debt that could leave Emma and me destitute. I took a picture of the note. This was it. This was the malice Marissa needed. I began to gather the papers, my mind racing with the logistics of how to put them back exactly as I found them. I needed the tape. I needed to align the edges perfectly. The doorknob turned. I froze. Mommy? The door creaked open. Emma stood there, holding her stuffed rabbit by the ear. She was wearing her favorite pink t-shirt, her hair messy from playing outside. She looked small and confused. Mommy, why is the door closed? Grandpa said we do not go in Grandpa Mark's room. Panic, sharp and electric, shot through me. If she told them, if she innocent mentioned. Mommy was in your room looking at papers. I shoved the pile of documents behind my back, forcing a smile that felt like it was made of glass. Hey, sweetie, I said, my voice jumping an octave. I was just looking for a pen. I dropped a pen under the desk. You know how clumsy Mommy is. Emma took a step inside, looking around suspiciously. Did you find it? Yes, I lied. I found it, but we have to be quick. Grandpa Mark does not like his things touched, right? I moved toward her, using my body to block her view of the open drawer and the scattered envelope. I knelt down and pulled her into a hug, squeezing her tighter than usual. "You smell like dust," Emma said into my shoulder. "I know. Baby, it is dusty in here," I whispered. "Listen to me. This is our secret game, okay? We are playing spies, and spies never tell anyone where they have been. Can you be a spy with me?" Emma pulled back, her eyes lighting up. "Like in the movie?" "Exactly like in the movie," I said, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. "We do not tell Grandma Elaine or Grandpa Mark that we were in here. If we do, the game is over. Promise?" "I promise," she nodded solemnly. "Good girl. Now, go check on Grandpa Harold for me. See if he wants a cookie. I will be right there." She turned and ran out of the room, her rabbit bouncing against her leg. I watched her go, and the smile dropped from my face instantly. I turned back to the desk. My hands were no longer shaking. They were steady with a terrifying kind of calm. I taped the envelope back under the drawer. I arranged the hanging folders. I wiped the handle of the filing cabinet with the hem of my shirt to remove my prints. I backed out of the room and locked the door with the nail file. I walked down the hallway, listening to Emma singing in the kitchen. For 3 years, I had made excuses for them. I had told myself they were just flawed people, that they were family, that deep down they loved me in their own broken way. I had forgiven the insults. I had forgiven the neglect. I had forgiven the way they treated me like a servant. But looking at that closed office door, I realized something had shifted. They had forged my name. They had stolen my credit. They had planned to saddle me with $70,000 of debt. But worse than all of that, they were gambling with the roof over Emma's head. They were willing to risk making my 6-year-old daughter homeless just so Elaine could drive a Mercedes and Mark could pretend he was still a big shot. I touched the phone in my pocket, feeling the digital weight of the evidence I had just collected. I thought about the note. Must kick the brat out. They wanted me gone so they could finish the job. They wanted me to disappear so they could consume what was left of my life. I walked into the kitchen and saw Emma trying to reach the cookie jar. I picked her up and lifted her high, listening to her giggle. "Mommy got you," I said, kissing her cheek. I looked at the reflection in the oven door. My eyes looked different, harder. There was no room left for forgiveness, not for Mark, not for Elaine, not for Kelsey. They had declared war on the wrong mother. "Here is your cookie," I said to Emma, setting her down. "Eat it fast. We have work to do." I was not going anywhere, and when the bank inspector arrived on Tuesday, I would be the first one to open the door. The strategy Marissa laid out for me was simple, but executing it felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. "Do not sign anything," she had instructed, her voice tinny through my earbuds. "Do not agree to leave. Do not pack another box. And most importantly, stop acting like a victim. Start acting like a recording device." It was Sunday morning. The 48-hour deadline Mark had set for my eviction was ticking down like a bomb timer, sitting at roughly 12 hours remaining. The house was thick with tension, a physical weight that pressed against my temples. Mark was pacing the hallway, his footsteps heavy and erratic. Elaine was in the kitchen, aggressively rearranging the silverware drawer, a sure sign that her nerves were fraying. I had spent the last hour cleaning the living room. It was a performance. I dusted the mantelpiece, I fluffed the pillows, I straightened the curtains, but my real objective was the cream-colored sofa. The sofa that had been the site of my humiliation 7 years ago was about to become my primary witness. I waited until Mark went out to the garage, and Elaine was distracted by the screech of the garbage disposal. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I had already downloaded a high-sensitivity voice recording app that could pick up a whisper from across the room. I tapped the red record button, verified the waveform was active, and then slid the phone deep into the crevice between the chaotic center cushions of the sectional. I positioned it so the microphone was facing outward, hidden beneath the lip of the fabric but not muffled by the stuffing. It was invisible. To anyone looking, it was just a sofa. To me, it was a wiretap. I retreated to the dining room, grabbing a book I had no intention of reading, and waited. It did not take long. Elaine wandered into the living room 10 minutes later. Phone pressed to her ear. She sat down right on top of the cushion where my phone lay hidden. I held my breath, half expecting her to feel the hard rectangle of metal beneath her, but the plush Belgian linen absorbed it. "I know, Kelsey, I know," Elaine said, her voice loud and shrill. "But your father is handling it. He says she will be gone by sunset. He is going to threaten to change the locks if she is not out." I turned a page of my book, my eyes scanning the same paragraph without comprehending a word. "Well, we have to," Elaine continued. "If the bank takes this house, we lose the equity. We need that cash to put down on the condo in Scottsdale. I am done with this drafty old money pit anyway." I froze. Scottsdale? They weren't just refinancing to pay debts. They were planning to cash out and leave. They were going to drain the equity from the house my mother had loved, the house I was paying to maintain, and run off to Arizona. "And the furniture?" Elaine scoffed. "No, God, no. We are leaving it, especially this sofa. I have hated this thing for years. It is too light. It shows every speck of dust. Besides, looking at it just reminds me of, well, you know, it has bad energy. When we get the loan money, I am buying that leather set we saw at the showroom, something that looks like money." I felt a cold smile touch my lips. Bad energy. She had no idea. She stood up and walked toward the kitchen, still chattering about leather grades and color palettes. I waited a full minute before I walked over, retrieved my phone, and stopped the recording. I played back the last 30 seconds, holding the speaker to my ear. Elaine's voice was crystal clear, admitting that they feared the bank taking the house and that they viewed the loan money as their ticket to a new life. I saved the file and uploaded it immediately to the encrypted cloud folder Marissa and I shared. I went upstairs to find Emma. She was sitting on her bed, drawing a picture of a house with a crooked chimney and a smiling sun. "Is that our house?" I asked, sitting down beside her. "It is the new house," she said matter-of-factly, "where Grandpa Mark does not yell." My heart broke a little, but I covered it with a squeeze of her hand. "You know, baby, sometimes we have to fight for the things we want, but I promise you something. One day, very soon, we are going to live in a house where nobody can tell us to leave. A house where you can draw on the walls if you want to. A place where we are the bosses." "Can we have a dog?" she asked, looking up with wide, hopeful eyes. "We can have a zoo if we want," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "Because it will be ours." I needed her to understand, even vaguely, that this chaos was temporary. I was planting a seed of independence in her mind, preparing her for the fact that our relationship with her grandparents was about to be severed permanently. Late in the afternoon, the atmosphere in the house shifted from tense to volatile. Mark had started drinking early. I could smell the scotch on his breath from 3 feet away when I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water. He was leaning against the counter, staring at a stack of unopened bills. When he saw me, his eyes narrowed. "You are still here," he slurred slightly. "I told you, 5 o'clock. It is 4:30. "I am not leaving. Dad," I said. I kept my voice calm, flat, devoid of the pleading tone I had used for decades. "I live here. My daughter lives here. We have nowhere to go. And you have no legal right to evict us without a court order." Mark laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Legal right? I own you. Juliet, I own this house. I own the clothes on your back. Do not talk to me about rights." "Actually," I said, taking a step closer, ensuring the phone in my pocket was recording, "I do not think you do own this house. Not entirely. Not if the bank finds out about the $40,000 you already took out in my name." The room went deadly silent. Mark's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. The veins in his neck bulged. He slammed his glass down on the counter so hard I thought it would shatter. "What did you say?" he hissed. "I know about the loan, Dad," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my feet planted firmly on the floor. "I know about the First National account. I know about the signature you forged. Or maybe it was Elaine. Did she trace it? Or did you use that fancy scanner of yours?" "You ungrateful little witch," he spat, moving toward me. "After everything I have done for you, I put a roof over your head. I fed your bastard child." "I paid for this roof," I shouted back, letting a fraction of my rage slip through. "I paid for the repairs. I paid rent, and you stole my identity to buy a car." "I did not steal anything," Mark roared, losing all control. "I am your father. What is yours is mine. If I had not signed that paper for you, we would all be on the street. The bank would have foreclosed 6 months ago. I saved us. I saved you." "Got him." "So you admit you signed it?" I asked, lowering my voice, baiting him into the final nail of his coffin. "You admit you signed my name because you thought you were saving the family?" "I signed it because you are too stupid to understand finance," he yelled, poking a finger into my chest. "I did what had to be done, and if you ruin this for me, if you blow this deal with the bank on Tuesday, I will make sure you never see a dime of inheritance. I will bury you, Juliet." I stood my ground, even as his spittle landed on my face. "You already buried me. Dad, I am just digging myself out." He stared at me, his chest heaving, realizing too late that he had said too much. The alcohol-fueled bravado flickered and died, replaced by a sudden, dawning fear. "Get out of my face," he muttered, turning away and reaching for the bottle again. I walked out of the kitchen, my legs shaking only after I was out of his sight. I went straight to the bathroom, locked the door, and sent the audio file to Marissa. 2 minutes later, a text came back. "Marissa, that is it. That is the confession. I signed it because you are too stupid. We have him on admission of forgery. Plus, my contact at the bank pulled the security logs. We have clear shots of Mark and Elaine entering the branch on the day the loan papers were filed. You were at work. We have your time card from Quantaloom to prove it. They are done. Juliet." I leaned against the bathroom sink, looking at myself in the mirror. I looked tired, pale, and terrified. But I also looked dangerous. The girl who used to apologize for staining a sofa was gone. "Marissa, there is only one thing left. To make this a slam dunk. To ensure they cannot claim mental incompetence or some other loophole. We need to prove a pattern. If Grandpa Harold really has what he says he has, that is the nuclear option." I washed my face with cold water and unlocked the door. Night had fallen. The house was quiet again, an uneasy truce hanging over the rooms. Mark had passed out in his recliner in the den. Elaine was in the bedroom with the door locked, probably packing her jewelry just in case. I walked into the living room. It was dark, illuminated only by the streetlights filtering through the sheer curtains. Grandpa Harold was there. He was sitting on the armchair adjacent to the cream sofa, his hands resting on his cane. He was staring at the sofa with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Grandpa?" I whispered. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the furniture. "They think they are clever," he said, his voice rough in the darkness. "They think because they put a new cover on it, the rot underneath is gone, but wood remembers. Juliet, wood and steel remember everything." I sat down on the floor near his feet, like I used to when I was a child listening to his stories. "Marissa says we have enough to stop the eviction. We have the recording of Dad admitting he signed the papers." Harold nodded slowly. "Good. But stopping them is not enough. You have to break the cycle. If you just stop them today, they will find another way to steal tomorrow. You have to cut the head off the snake." He turned to look at me then. His eyes were clear, sharp, and utterly ruthless. "People hide their dirty secrets in dark places," he said. "Basements, attics, safe deposit boxes in banks across town. They think if they bury it deep enough, it ceases to exist. But I never believed in burying things." He pointed a shaking finger at the sofa. "I hid the truth right there," he said. "In the one place Elaine forbade anyone from touching, the one place she protected more than her own children, I knew she would never let anyone dismantle it. Her vanity was my security system." "What is in there, Grandpa?" I asked, looking at the smooth, pristine lines of the sectional. "The history of this family," he said. "The real deed to the house, the original trust documents my father left, and the proof of every dollar Mark has siphoned off since 1995. It is all there, along with something else, something that makes the house yours, not his." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Tomorrow morning, the lawyer is coming, yes?" "Yes," I said. "Marissa will be here at 9 o'clock. "Good," Harold said. "Make sure Mark and Elaine are in the room. Make sure Kelsey is watching. I want an audience."
Why?
"Because," he said, a small, grim smile touching his lips, "I want to see Elaine's face when I tell you to rip open her precious Belgian linen." "We are going to cut it open?" I asked, shocked. "We are going to gut it," Harold declared. "Just like they gutted your savings account." He sat back, looking satisfied. "Go to sleep. Juliet, rest. You will need your strength. Tomorrow, we do not just win a lawsuit. Tomorrow, we take back the kingdom." I stood up and kissed him on the cheek. "Good night, Grandpa." "Good night, fighter," he murmured. I walked up the stairs to my room, glancing back one last time at the living room. The sofa sat there, silent and imposing in the moonlight. For 7 years, it had been a symbol of my clumsiness, my debt, my subservience. But as I looked at it now, I did not see a piece of furniture. I saw a vault, and I held the combination. Mark had given me 48 hours to leave. I only needed 12 more to bury him. Sunday morning arrived with the deceptive brightness of a spring day, mocking the grim reality that awaited inside our walls. The sunlight streamed through the bay windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, but it could not touch the cold, stagnant tension that filled the living room. Elaine had been up since 6 in the morning. I could hear her aggressive vacuuming, the machine roaring like a beast as she manicured the carpets for what she considered to be her victory lap. By 9 o'clock, she had staged the room as if we were hosting a viewing for prospective buyers. A silver tray with a pot of coffee and 4 china cups sat on the coffee table. The curtains were tied back perfectly, and in the center of it all, the cream-colored sectional sofa sat like a throne, flanked by fresh vases of lilies that smelled suffocatingly sweet. Mark was pacing near the fireplace, checking his watch every 30 seconds. He had called Kelsey down from her room, and she sat perched on the arm of a side chair, scrolling nervously through her phone, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else on earth. I stood near the kitchen archway, holding a mug of tea that had gone cold. I was calm. It was a terrifying, unnatural kind of calm that settled over me only because I knew I was not alone. Marissa was on her way. I had the recording of Mark's confession on my phone, but Grandpa Harold had insisted we wait. Let them assemble. He had told me over breakfast. A play needs an audience. "Juliet, come sit down," Mark barked, breaking the silence. "We need to settle this like adults before the deadline expires this evening. I want this house empty and broom swept by 6 o'clock. "There is nothing to settle, Mark," I said, refusing to move from my spot. "I told you last night, I am not leaving." Elaine poured a cup of coffee, the china rattling slightly in her saucer. "Oh, stop being dramatic. Juliet, we are trying to be civilized. We are even willing to give you a little cash to help with a motel for a few nights. Consider it a severance package." "A severance package," I repeated, the absurdity of the corporate term tasting bitter in my mouth. "From my own family." Before Mark could explode, the sound of a cane tapping against the hardwood floor echoed from the hallway. Tap, tap, tap. Grandpa Harold shuffled into the room. He was dressed differently today. Gone was the stained cardigan and the loose sweatpants. He was wearing his old tweed suit jacket, the one he used to wear to board meetings 30 years ago. It was frayed at the cuffs, but he wore it with a dignity that made the room feel suddenly smaller. "Good morning," Harold said, his voice surprisingly strong. "Dad," Mark said, his tone impatient, "we are in the middle of a family discussion. Maybe you should go back to your room." "A family discussion," Harold mused, stopping right in front of the coffee table. He looked at Mark, then at Elaine, and finally at Kelsey. "That is excellent. I think that is exactly what we need. A real family discussion. But you are all scattered around the room like strangers. He pointed a trembling finger at the massive cream sofa. Sit, he commanded. All of you, sit on the sofa. Let us be close. Let us look like the perfect family Elaine is always trying to photograph. Elaine looked surprised. Then a slow, smug smile spread across her face. She interpreted this as the old man finally falling in line, perhaps trying to create a nice memory before the troublemaker was kicked out. Of course, Harold, Elaine said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. You are right. Mark, Kelsey, come sit. Let us show Grandpa we can be united. Mark sighed, clearly annoyed, but he sat down on the left side of the sectional. Elaine took the center, smoothing her skirt, and beckoned Kelsey to sit on the right. They sat there, 3 generations of entitlement resting on Belgian linen. There, Harold said, nodding. Now you look comfortable. We are comfortable, Mark said. Now, Juliet, about your keys. Hush, Harold snapped. It was sharp enough to make Mark close his mouth. Harold walked slowly around the side of the sofa. He moved behind them, so he was standing between the back of the couch and the bay window. They had to crane their necks to look at him, which disrupted their power dynamic immediately. I remember when you bought this sofa. Elaine, Harold said, his hand resting on the top ridge of the backrest. 7 years ago, $3,000. You said it was the only thing in the house that mattered. I said it was high quality, Elaine corrected, twisting around to look at him. And it has held up beautifully, despite Juliet's best efforts to ruin it. Quality, Harold murmured. Yes, it has good bones, better than you know. He began to run his hand along the back of the sofa, his fingers tracing the piping of the upholstery. I watched him, confused. He was feeling for something. Juliet, Harold called out, his eyes meeting mine over their heads. You are a designer. You know about construction, furniture frames. Yes, I said, stepping closer. Come here, he said. I want you to see this. I walked over to where he stood behind the sofa. Mark and Elaine were shifting uncomfortably now, sensing that something was off. What are you doing, Dad? Mark asked. Stop touching the fabric. Harold ignored him. His fingers found a spot near the center of the back panel, right where the 2 sections of the sofa joined. To the naked eye, it was just a seam in the fabric, but Harold pressed his thumb hard against a small, imperceptible lump under the velvet piping. Click. It was a soft sound, mechanical and precise, like a latch releasing. I gasped. As a designer, I knew joinery, I knew how things were put together, but I had never seen this. The entire upholstered panel on the back of the center seat, a square section about 2 feet wide, popped outward by a fraction of an inch. Juliet, Harold said, stepping back and leaning on his cane, his breathing a little heavy. My hands are not what they used to be. Pull that open for me. Mark started to stand up. What the hell did you break? Sit down, Harold roared. It was a voice I had not heard since I was a child, the voice of the man who had built a business empire from nothing. Mark sank back into the cushions, stunned. I reached out and gripped the edge of the upholstered panel. It was heavy. It slid outward on silent, well-oiled drawer slides, revealing that the hollow space inside the backrest of the sofa had been modified. It was not just wood and stuffing inside. Mounted flush into the custom-built frame was a flat, steel safe. It was sleek, painted matte black to blend into the shadows of the frame, with a mechanical rotary dial. Oh my God, Kelsey whispered, turning around to stare. Elaine let out a strangled sound. What is that? What have you done to my sofa? Your sofa? Harold chuckled darkly. You just picked the color. Elaine, I paid for the custom frame modification before it ever left the factory. You were so busy bragging about the price tag. You never checked the specs. He looked at me. 32, 19, 88, 4. I understood immediately. It was the combination. My hands were shaking, but my fingers were nimble. I turned the dial. 32, 19, 88, 4. The lock tumbled with a heavy thud. I pulled the handle. The door of the safe swung open. It was not empty. Inside, stacked neatly in the narrow space, was a thick leather portfolio, a black USB drive, and a large manila envelope sealed with red wax. "Take them," Harold said. I reached in and pulled out the items. They felt heavy in my hands, weighted with years of silence. "That is my private property," Mark yelled. Finally finding his voice, he lunged up from the sofa, reaching for the papers. "Do not touch her," Harold said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "If you touch those papers, Mark, I will call the police myself and tell them about the jewelry you stole from your mother's vanity in 2005. Do you think I forgot?" Mark froze, his hand hovering in midair. His face went pale. He slowly lowered his arm. I looked down at the envelope in my hand. The wax seal was unbroken. The handwriting on the front was in calligraphy, elegant and old-fashioned. Last will and testament of Harold Whitaker, regarding the Maple Creek assets. "Open it, Juliet," Harold said. "Read the first paragraph of the property clause." I broke the seal. The paper inside was thick, official, and smelled of age. I unfolded it, my eyes scanning the legal jargon until I found the section he mentioned. "I, Harold Whitaker," I read aloud, my voice trembling. "Being of sound mind and body, hereby establish the Maple Creek Living Trust. Upon the date of this notarization, title to the property located at 42 Elm Street, Maple Creek, Oregon, is transferred in its entirety to the trust." I paused, looking up. "The trust?" "Keep reading," Harold urged. "The sole beneficiary of the Maple Creek Living Trust," I read, my breath hitching, "is Juliet Marie Hart. Control of the asset is to be held by the trustee, Harold Whitaker, until such time as he deems necessary, or upon his death. However, strict provision is made that no loans, liens, mortgages, or encumbrances may be placed upon the property without the direct, notarized written consent of the beneficiary, Juliet Marie Hart." The room went dead silent. I looked at Mark. "You do not own the house." Mark was staring at his father, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. That is impossible. You told me you signed the deed over to me 10 years ago. You said it was a gift." "I lied," Harold said simply. "I signed a document giving you occupancy rights. You never read the fine print, Mark. You never do. You just saw what you wanted to see." "This is a trick," Elaine screeched, standing up and grabbing the cushion. "This is some sort of senile delusion. The bank has the deed. We showed them the deed." "You showed them a forgery," Harold said calmly, "just like you forged Juliet's signature on that loan application last month." Elaine went white. "But why?" I asked, looking at the old man who was leaning on his cane, looking like a tired warrior. "Why did you hide it in the sofa? Why didn't you just tell me?" Harold reached out and took the USB drive from the stack I was holding. He held it up to the light. "Because I needed you to see them for who they really are," he said. "And I needed proof." He pointed to the USB. 7 years ago," he said, looking at Elaine. "The day of the wine stain. I knew you would lie about what happened. I knew you would twist the story to make Juliet look like the villain. So, the next day, I had a security technician come in while you were at the spa. I had cameras installed, tiny ones, in the vents, in the bookshelves." Elaine gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "This drive," Harold continued, his voice hard as iron, "contains the footage from that night. It shows you, Elaine, dragging a 25-year-old woman by the hair. It shows you pinning her down on this very sofa and screaming into her face while she begged you to stop. And it shows you, Mark, standing there drinking a beer, watching your wife assault your daughter and doing absolutely nothing." I felt tears prick my eyes. He had it. He had the proof that it wasn't just me being clumsy, it was assault. "I kept it," Harold said. "I put it in the safe, along with every other piece of evidence I collected over the years. The bank statements you tried to hide, the notices of default you threw in the trash. I knew a day would come when you would try to eat your own young, and I knew that when that day came, Juliet would need a weapon. He looked at the sofa, then at the 3 people sitting on it. I built the safe into this sofa for a reason, Harold said. You love this piece of furniture. Elaine, you worship it. You treat it better than you treat people. It is the symbol of your vanity, your obsession with appearance. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. I thought it was poetic, he said, to hide the truth that would destroy you inside the very object you used to humiliate her. Every time you sat here, every time you fluffed these pillows, you were sitting on the evidence of your own fraud. You were resting your backs against the very document that stripped you of everything. Mark sank his head into his hands. Dad, how could you? How could I? Harold countered, his voice rising. You were going to make her homeless. You were going to saddle her with $70,000 of debt and kick her out on the street with a 6-year-old child. Do not ask me about morality. Mark, you lost the right to that conversation a long time ago. I looked at the document in my hand. The house was mine. It had been mine for years. The payments I made, the repairs I funded. I wasn't throwing money into a black hole. I was investing in my own property. And the loan they had just taken out? The $40,000? Since the house belonged to a trust, and I was the beneficiary, Mark had no legal standing to pledge it as collateral. The bank's lien was invalid. It was fraud, pure and simple. Elaine was trembling. She looked at the open panel in the sofa, then at me, then at the door. She looked like a trapped animal. This doesn't hold up, she stammered, desperate. That will is old. We can contest it. We can say he was incompetent when he wrote it. It was notarized by Judge Reynolds, Harold said. He is still alive, and he hates you, Elaine. I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt different now. It was no longer heavy. It was crisp. Get off my sofa, I said. They looked at me. I said, get off, I repeated, my voice steady and loud. Get off my sofa, in my house. Kelsey stood up immediately, looking terrified. She moved to the corner of the room, distancing herself from her parents. Mark stood up slowly, looking like an old man. Elaine stayed seated for a second longer, her hands clutching the cushion, her knuckles white. Then, realizing she had no cards left to play, she stood up. They stood there, clustered on the rug, looking at the open safe that gaped like a wound in their perfect living room. We are not done, I said, clutching the file to my chest. My lawyer will be here in 5 minutes, and she is going to love this video. I looked at Grandpa Harold. He winked at me. The war was not over, but the castle had just been recaptured, and the throne they had sat on for years had just turned out to be the electric chair. Mark's hand was inches from the yellowed parchment of the will when the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, insistent sound that cut through the thick tension in the living room like a knife. He froze, his fingers hovering over the document that proved he was a squatter in the home he claimed to rule. Ignore it, Mark snapped, his eyes wild. Give me that paper, Juliet, now. I would not do that if I were you, I said, clutching the heavy file to my chest. That is my guest. I turned my back on him, exposing my neck to the man who had just threatened to bury me, and walked to the front door. My legs felt lighter than they had in years. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door open. Marissa Cole stood on the porch. She looked immaculate. She was wearing a sharp black suit that cost more than my car. Her hair cut in a severe, precise bob that framed a face made of stone. In her hand, she held a leather briefcase that looked heavy with the weight of justice. Good morning, Juliet, she said. Her voice was cool, professional, and loud enough to carry into the living room. I believe we have a 9 o'clock appointment. We do, I said, stepping aside. Please, come in. Marissa stepped across the threshold, the click of her heels on the hardwood echoing like gunfire. She did not look around with the polite curiosity of a guest. She scanned the space with the predatory assessment of a litigator entering a hostile courtroom. We walked into the living room. Mark had retreated to the fireplace, trying to regain his composure. Elaine was standing by the coffee table, smoothing her skirt with frantic, jerky motions. When she saw Marissa, her face underwent a fascinating transformation. The snarl of a cornered animal vanished, replaced instantly by the plasticky, welcoming smile of the perfect hostess. "Oh, hello," Elaine chirped, her voice pitching high. "We did not know we had company. I am afraid the house is a bit of a mess right now. We are having a family discussion." She took a half step forward, extending a hand. "I am Elaine Hart, and you are?" Marissa did not take the hand. She did not even smile. She looked at Elaine, then at Mark, then at the terrified Kelsey in the corner. "I am not company, Mrs. Hart," Marissa said, "and I am not here for a discussion." I stepped up beside her. "This is Marissa Cole. She is my attorney." The word hung in the air. Attorney. Elaine's hand dropped to her side. The smile faltered, then died completely. "Attorney?" Mark scoffed, trying to summon his usual bluster. "Juliet, do not be ridiculous. You cannot afford a lawyer. You can barely afford your car payment." "I am working pro bono," Marissa said, cutting him off. She walked to the coffee table, the one Elaine had set with china cups just an hour ago, and set her briefcase down. "Because I have a particular distaste for fraud, and this morning, looking at the documents my client has sent me, I am smelling a great deal of it." She snapped the latches of the briefcase open. The sound was loud in the silent room. "Sit down," Marissa commanded. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. She spoke with the absolute authority of someone who knew exactly where the landmines were buried. Mark hesitated, then sank into the armchair. Elaine perched on the edge of the cream sofa, the sofa with the safe still gaping open behind her. Kelsey remained standing in the corner, hugging herself. Marissa began to pull files from her case. She laid them out on the table with deliberate precision, covering the floral arrangement Elaine had placed there. "Exhibit A," Marissa said, placing a color printout in the center. "A copy of the loan agreement with First National Bank for a home equity line of credit in the amount of $40,000, signed by Juliet Hart, dated 6 weeks ago." "Exhibit B," she continued, placing a stack of emails next to it. "Server logs showing that all digital correspondence from First National Bank to Juliet's email address was intercepted and auto-archived by a filter rule created on the Household Router Administrator account, an account registered to Mark Hart." "Exhibit C," she finished, placing the yellowed will that I had handed her on top of the pile. "The last will and testament of Harold Whitaker, establishing an irrevocable living trust that lists Juliet Hart as the sole beneficiary and owner of this property." She looked up, resting her hands on the table. Now," Marissa said, "would anyone like to explain to me why my client's signature is on a loan document for a house she already owns, authorized by people who have no legal title to the property?" Mark cleared his throat. He looked sweaty. "Look, Ms. Cole, you are misunderstanding the situation. This is a family matter, complex finances. I have been managing this estate for 20 years. Sometimes you have to move assets around to keep the lights on. Juliet does not understand the burden of overhead. I had to sign for her. It was an emergency. I did it to save the roof over her head." "So you admit to signing it?" Marissa asked. Her eyes were like lasers. "I admitted to managing the family business," Mark shouted, his face flushing red. "I am her father. I have implied power of attorney. If I did not take that loan, the bank was going to foreclose on the previous mortgage. I had no choice." "There is no such thing as implied power of attorney for a secured loan," Marissa said coldly. "And let us be clear about the legal terminology here. Mr. Hart, you did not manage assets. You committed forgery. That is a felony. You committed wire fraud by transmitting those forged documents across state lines to the bank's processing center in Utah. That is a federal crime. And you committed mortgage fraud. Do you know the mandatory minimum sentence for that in federal court? It is not a weekend in county jail. It is years." Mark shrank back in his chair. The reality of the situation was finally piercing his narcissism. Elaine jumped in, desperate to deflect. "It was the bank!" she cried, pointing a shaking finger at the papers. "The loan officer!" She was confused. We told her Juliet was the owner, but she said it would be easier if we just handled the paperwork because Juliet was at work. It was a clerical error. You cannot blame us for their incompetence. Marissa smiled. It was a terrifying expression. "I thought you might say that," she said. "Which is why I had a colleague of mine request the security logs from the First National Branch on Main Street." She pulled a glossy photograph from her folder and slid it across the table toward Elaine. "This was taken at 10:14 in the morning on the Tuesday the loan was finalized," Marissa said. I leaned over to look. The photo was grainy but clear enough. It showed a desk at the bank. Sitting in the chair was Mark, and next to him, leaning over the desk, was Elaine. She was holding a phone up, showing something to the teller. "And here is the affidavit from the teller," Marissa said, placing a document next to the photo. She states that Mrs. Elaine Hart presented a digital image of a signature on her phone, claimed it was sent by her stepdaughter who was stuck in a meeting, and asked the teller to accept it as a verified e-signature. The teller refused. Then, according to the log, Mrs. Hart stepped outside, and 10 minutes later, a verified digital signature was uploaded to the portal from a remote IP address. The IP address of your cell phone. Mrs. Hart? Elaine stared at the photo. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The clerical error defense had just evaporated. Marissa turned her gaze to the corner of the room. "Kelsey," she said. Kelsey flinched as if she had been slapped. I did not sign anything." "No," Marissa agreed. "You did not. But financial records show that 2 days after the loan funds were disbursed into your parents' joint account, a transfer of $4,000 was made to your personal checking account, and the next day, a charge for a round-trip ticket to Paris appeared on your statement." Kelsey's face crumpled. She looked at Mark, then at Elaine. "Did you know where that money came from, Kelsey?" Marissa asked softly. "Because receiving proceeds from a fraudulent loan makes you an accessory after the fact. That is also a crime." "I told them not to," Kelsey burst out, tears streaming down her face. "I told Mom it was dangerous, but she said Juliet would never know. She said the house was ours anyway, and Juliet was just a placeholder. I just wanted to go on the trip. I did not want to go to jail." "Shut up, Kelsey," Elaine screamed. "Thank you, Kelsey," Marissa said calmly. "That admission is very helpful." She turned back to Mark and Elaine. The room felt small, the air sucked out of it by the weight of the evidence. "So," Marissa said, "here is where we stand. We have a confession from Mark recorded by my client last night. We have a confession from Kelsey just now. We have the physical evidence of the forgery. We have the bank logs. And we have the will." She gestured to the open safe in the sofa. "And we have the testimony of the trustee." Grandpa Harold stepped forward. He had been silent during the exchange, watching the dismantling of his son's lies with a grim satisfaction. He moved to the table and placed his hand on the will. "I never changed it," Harold said, his voice raspy but clear. "I wrote this will 20 years ago. Mark knew it. Elaine knew it. They just thought that if they ignored it long enough, and if they kept me medicated and quiet in the corner, it would go away. They thought they could bully Juliet into signing the house over eventually." He looked at Mark with profound disappointment. "You used my silence, Mark," Harold said. "You thought because I did not speak, I did not see. You borrowed against this house 3 times in the last decade. I paid off the first 2 with my pension because I did not want Juliet to lose her inheritance. But this time you went too far. You tried to make her a criminal in her own home." Mark looked down at his shoes. "I needed the money. Dad, the business, it is gone. It has been gone for years." "That is not my client's problem," Marissa cut in, "and it is certainly not a justification for identity theft." She gathered the papers into a neat stack, tapping them against the table to align the edges. The sound was final. "Here is what is going to happen," Marissa announced. "Tomorrow morning, Juliet will be filing a police report regarding the forgery and the identity theft. We will be submitting all this evidence to the district attorney. Simultaneously, we will be filing a civil suit to void the mortgage contract based on fraud and suing you for the return of the $40,000, plus punitive damages for emotional distress and financial abuse. You are going to send us to prison? Elaine whispered, her face gray. I am not sending you anywhere, Marissa said. You sent yourselves there the moment you traced Juliet's signature, but that is for the courts to decide. My immediate concern is the safety and property rights of my client. She checked her watch. You have no legal right to be in this house, Marissa stated. The owner, Juliet Hart, is revoking your guest privileges effective immediately. Given the criminal nature of your actions against her and the clear evidence of hostility, your presence here constitutes a threat to her safety. Marissa pulled her phone out. You have 1 hour to pack a bag and vacate the premises, she said. If you are not on the other side of that curb in 60 minutes, I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing. And given that there is a grand larceny investigation pending, I imagine they will be very interested in taking you into custody right now. 1 hour? Mark sputtered. We live here. All our things are here. You have been squatting here, Marissa corrected. You can arrange for a moving company to collect your furniture later, under police supervision. But right now, you leave. Take your personal effects and get out. This is insane, Elaine cried, looking around the room frantically. Where are we supposed to go? We have no money. You said the account was frozen. I did not say it was frozen, Marissa said. But I imagine the bank has already flagged it for suspicious activity. I would try a motel that takes cash. I stood there, watching them, the giants of my childhood, the people who had controlled every aspect of my life, who had made me feel small and worthless. They were shrinking before my eyes. Mark looked old. His posture collapsed. The arrogance drained out of him like water from a cracked cup. He wasn't a patriarch anymore. He was just a failed businessman who had been caught stealing from his daughter. But Elaine was not looking at the floor. She was looking at me. The shock was wearing off, and something else was taking its place. A cold, serpentine malice. She realized the legal battle was lost. She realized the money was gone. She realized the house was gone. But she still had one card left to play, the card she always played when logic failed. She stood up slowly, smoothing her silk blouse. She picked up her purse from the sofa. Fine, Elaine said softly. We will go. She walked over to me, stopping just inches away. Marissa tensed, ready to intervene, but Elaine did not raise a hand. She just smiled. It was a sad, pitying smile that chilled me to the bone. You think you have won, Juliet, she whispered. You think this house and these papers make you safe, but you are forgetting something. You are forgetting that family secrets do not just live in safes. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping so low that only I could hear. I know about the summer of 2012, she hissed. I know what really happened before you got pregnant with Emma, and if you think I am going to let you ruin my life without burning yours to the ground, you are very much mistaken. She pulled back, her eyes glittering. Go ahead, Elaine said aloud, turning to the room. Call the police, sue us. But remember, Juliet, when you drag family through the mud, everyone gets dirty. She turned to Mark. Come on, Mark, get up. We are leaving. Mark stood up, dazed, and followed her toward the stairs like a dog on a leash. Kelsey grabbed her bag and ran after them, sobbing. I stood in the silence of the living room. My heart was pounding, not from fear of the law, but from the venom in Elaine's threat. Marissa looked at me. What did she say to you? I stared at the empty cream sofa. The safe was still open, the dark metal interior exposed to the light. She is going to try to hurt me, I said quietly. She is going to try to destroy my reputation. I looked at Grandpa Harold. He was gripping his cane, his knuckles white. Let her try, I said, my voice hardening. I have nothing left to hide.
The 60-minute countdown Marissa had initiated hung over the room like a guillotine blade, but Elaine was not ready to put her head on the block. She had stopped halfway to the door. The imperious mask of the wealthy matriarch, which she had worn so tightly just moments ago, suddenly cracked. It crumbled with a terrifying speed, replaced by something softer, wetter, and infinitely more dangerous. She dropped her designer handbag onto the floor. It hit the hardwood with a heavy thud. Then, she turned around. Her eyes were swimming with tears that seemed to manifest on command. "Juliet," she choked out, her voice trembling with a sorrow that sounded heartbreakingly real. "Please, look at us." I stayed where I was, anchored by the presence of my lawyer on one side and my grandfather on the other. "I am looking, Elaine, I see 3 people who tried to rob me." "We were desperate," she sobbed, taking a step toward me, her hands clasped in supplication. "You do not understand what it is like to lose everything, your father. He tried so hard, but the business failed. We were drowning. I grew up with nothing. Juliet. Dirt floors, hand-me-down clothes. I swore I would never go back to that. I swore Kelsey would never know that kind of hunger." She gestured wildly to Kelsey, who was sniffling in the corner. "Everything I did," Elaine cried, the tears now streaming freely down her perfectly made-up face. "I did for this family. I did it to secure a future. Was it wrong? Maybe. But it was out of love, a twisted, desperate love. Can you not see that?" "Love does not forge signatures," I said, my voice flat. "We intended to pay it back," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "Once the condo in Scottsdale was bought, once the market turned, we would have paid off the loan. You never would have known. We were trying to protect you from the burden of our failure." She was good. I had to give her that. For a fleeting second, the image of the wicked stepmother dissolved, replaced by a terrified woman trying to keep her head above water. Then she pivoted, aiming her weapon directly at my chest. "And think about your father," she whispered, pointing at Mark, who stood slumped and gray-faced by the stairs. "Look at him, Juliet. He is an old man. If you do this, if you drag him into a courtroom in handcuffs, it will kill him. He will die of shame. Is that what you want?" I looked at Mark. He did look frail. He looked nothing like the tyrant who had ordered me out of the house yesterday. "Do you want Emma to grow up knowing her mother sent her grandfather to prison?" Elaine pressed, sensing my hesitation. "Do you want her to carry that stain? People will talk. Juliet, they will say you destroyed your own family over money. They will say you were heartless. You can stop this. Just let us go. Drop the lawsuit. We will sign whatever you want. Just do not destroy us." My heart hammered against my ribs. The guilt, conditioned into me over 3 decades of compliance, flared up. It was a hot, suffocating wave. "He is my dad." A small voice inside me whispered. "He used to push me on the swings. He used to fix my bicycle." I remembered a Tuesday when I was 10. Mark had picked me up from school early to get ice cream. I remembered the way he laughed. "Juliet," Marissa warned, her voice low and sharp, "do not listen to her." But I was wavering. I looked at the floor. Maybe jail was too harsh. Maybe I could just let them leave. Maybe... "Juliet." It was Grandpa Harold. He did not shout. He just said my name with a heavy, sorrowful weight. I looked at him. He was holding the black USB drive in one hand and a stack of papers from the safe in the other. "Before you let your heart bleed for a man who would have bled your bank account dry," Harold said, "you need to see the rest of the file." He handed me a sheet of paper from the stack. It was not a bank statement. It was a pawn shop receipt, dated 2015. "Read it," Harold commanded. I looked at the item description: platinum necklace, sapphire pendant, vintage cut. My breath caught in my throat. That was my mother's necklace, the one she had worn on her wedding day, the one Mark told me had been lost during a move. He had looked me in the eye, held my hand, and told me how sorry he was that it was gone. He had sold it. He had sold my dead mother's most creating possession for $1,200. "And here," Harold said, handing me another receipt. "Diamond stud earrings, 1 carat total weight, my graduation present from my mother. Mark told me they must have fallen down the drain."
"He stole them," Harold said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "He did not steal to feed the family, Juliet. He stole to pay off gambling debts. He stole to buy Elaine those purses she likes so much. I tracked every single item. I tried to buy them back, but I was too late for the necklace." The image of Mark on the swings vanished, replaced by the image of him rummaging through my jewelry box while I was at work. I looked up at Elaine. The pity in my chest had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard crater. "He stole Mom's necklace," I said. Elaine flinched. That was a mistake, a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding a pawn ticket," I shouted, the anger finally breaking through. Harold was not done. He turned back to the safe, his hand resting on the open metal door. "You talk about the future, Elaine," Harold said, his voice cutting through her sobs. "You talk about securing an inheritance for Kelsey and Mark. You claimed you did all of this fraud to protect their legacy." He reached into the very back of the safe and pulled out a single, thin document. It was stapled to the back of the will I had read earlier. "I knew you were greedy," Harold said. "I knew that one day the house wouldn't be enough. So, 5 years ago, I added a codicil to my will, a condition." He adjusted his glasses and read from the paper. "In addition to the property trust, I hereby set aside a cash sum of $100,000 to be divided equally between my son, Mark Hart, and my granddaughter, Kelsey Hart, upon my death." Elaine's eyes widened. Kelsey stopped crying and looked up, a flicker of hope crossing her face. $100,000. It was a lifeline. "However," Harold continued, his voice becoming steel, "this cash bequest is subject to a strict condition of conduct. If at any time prior to or after my death, Mark Hart or Kelsey Hart are found to have engaged in any fraudulent activity, financial abuse, or legal maneuvering intended to deprive Juliet Hart of her rightful ownership of the Maple Creek property, this bequest is immediately null and void." The silence that followed was absolute. "The money," Harold said, lowering the paper, "was your safety net. It was right here. All you had to do was treat Juliet with basic human decency. All you had to do was leave the house alone. But you could not do it. You got greedy. You tried to steal the house and keep the cash." He looked at Mark. "You violated the condition, son. The money goes back into the estate. It goes to Juliet." Elaine looked as if she had been shot. The color drained from her face so completely that she looked like a corpse standing upright. "No," she whispered. "No, you cannot do that. We need that money." Then, the rage took over. She spun around and screamed at Mark. "You idiot!" she shrieked, her voice shredding the air. "I told you to read the whole thing. I told you to check for amendments when you found the copy in his desk." The room froze. Marissa let out a soft, sharp breath. She looked at me, and I saw the triumph in her eyes. "Did you hear that?" Marissa asked calmly. Elaine clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. "You just admitted that you knew the will existed," Marissa said, stepping forward. "You admitted that you found a copy in his desk, which means when you told the bank, and us, that you thought Mark owned the house, you were lying. You knew Juliet was the owner. You knew about the trust. This proves premeditation. It proves malice. You did not just make a mistake, Elaine. You actively conspired to defraud the rightful owner." Elaine backed away, shaking her head. "No, I misspoke. I was upset." "It is too late," Marissa said. "I have 3 witnesses." In the corner, Kelsey made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. It was the sound of hysteria. "So there is no money?" Kelsey asked, her voice trembling. "The 100,000, it is gone?" "It is gone, Kelsey," Harold said gently, "because you helped your mother try to steal the house." "I did not want to!" Kelsey screamed, turning on Elaine with the ferocity of a trapped animal. "It was her idea. She made me. She told me if I did not help her convince Dad, I would be stuck in this town forever. She said Juliet was stupid and wouldn't notice. I just wanted to go to Paris. Kelsey, shut up! Elaine roared, lunging toward her daughter. No, Kelsey shouted, backing away. I am not going to jail for you. I am not going to be poor because of you. It was Mom. She planned the whole thing. She found the scanner. She practiced the signature. Dad did not even want to do it at first, but she threatened to leave him if he did not get her the money. The family front, so carefully polished for years, shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces right there on the living room rug. They were eating each other, just as Grandpa Harold had predicted. I watched them, Mark staring blankly at the wall, Elaine screaming at Kelsey, Kelsey sobbing and pointing fingers. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was the death of the last lingering hope I had for them, the death of the little girl who wanted her daddy to love her. I stood up. Enough, I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through their noise like a blade. Stop it, I said. All of you. They fell silent, looking at me. Look at yourselves, I said, my voice shaking with the intensity of my disgust. You are fighting over scraps. You are fighting over money you tried to steal. You are willing to sell each other out for a check. I walked over to Mark. He would not look at me. I used to think family meant sticking together, I said to him. I used to think it meant sacrifice. I sacrificed my savings for this house. I sacrificed my privacy. I sacrificed my dignity. I turned to Elaine. But you taught me something today. Elaine, you taught me that for you. Family is just a resource. It is a bank account you can drain. It is a reputation you can use. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the USB drive in my pocket, the evidence of my abuse, and now, the evidence of their theft. Family is not a place where you use my name to commit crimes, I said. It is not a place where you gamble with my sweat and my daughter's future. If you want to know who destroyed this family, do not look at me. Look in the mirror. I turned to Grandpa Harold. Grandpa, I said, what do you want to do? Harold looked at his son. He looked at the woman who had driven a wedge between them. He looked at the granddaughter who had chosen greed over loyalty. I am tired, Juliet, Harold said softly. I am very tired of the noise. He straightened his tweed jacket and looked at the group. From this moment forward, Harold declared, his voice ringing with the authority of the patriarch he truly was, I am stepping down as the acting trustee. I am invoking the immediate transfer clause. Juliet Hart has full, unrestricted power of attorney over the Maple Creek asset and all legal matters pertaining to the estate. He looked at me. It is your house, Juliet, he said, and it is your lawsuit. Do whatever you have to do to make this house clean again, even if it means we lose a few people along the way. It was the final sanction. The sword had been passed. I looked at Marissa. Proceed with the filing, criminal and civil. I want full restitution. I want the necklace back or its value in cash, and I want them out, now. Elaine stared at me. Her chest was heaving. She looked from the open safe to the lawyer, and finally to me. She realized the emotional manipulation had failed. She realized the poverty story had failed. She realized the guilt trip had failed. She wiped the tears from her face. The sadness vanished. The fear vanished. What remained was pure distilled hatred. She straightened her spine. She was in survival mode now, a rat cornered in a trap, baring its teeth for one last bite. You think you are so righteous, Elaine hissed, her voice low and venomous. You think you are the victim here, but you are forgetting something, Juliet. You have secrets too. Mark looked up, confused. Elaine, let us just go. Oh, no, Elaine said, shaking him off. She stepped closer to me, her eyes glittering with malice. If you file that lawsuit, Juliet, if you send the police to my door, I will tell them. I will tell everyone. Tell them what? I asked, bracing myself. I will tell them about the real reason you left your husband. She smiled. A cruel, twisting thing. I will tell them about the money you lost at his company before the divorce. I will tell them the story you have been hiding from Emma for 6 years. It was a bluff, or a twisted version of a half-truth she had invented, but the intent was clear. She was threatening to nuke my reputation to save her own skin. I looked at her. Then I looked at Grandpa Harold, who nodded once, his eyes fierce. I looked at Marissa, who stood ready with her pen and her pad, unafraid. They were with me. "Go ahead," I said to Elaine, my voice steady. "Tell them whatever you want, because unlike you, I have the truth in a safe, and I am not afraid to open it." Elaine's threat hung in the air, toxic and desperate. She stood there, her chest heaving, looking like a queen whose castle was burning down around her but who was determined to throw one last torch at the villagers. She turned to the room, her eyes wild, and pointed a shaking finger at me. "You all think she is the saint," Elaine spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You think she is just the poor, hard-working single mother, but I know the truth. I know why she really came back here 3 years ago." She looked at Grandpa Harold, then at Marissa, trying to find a weak link. "She did not just come back to save money," Elaine sneered. "She came back because she is a failure, just like she was a failure in college. Tell them, Juliet, tell them about the scholarship." My stomach tightened. It was an old wound, one I had let heal over a decade, but Elaine knew exactly where the scar tissue was. "She had a full ride," Elaine announced, triumph gleaming in her eyes. "A full scholarship to one of the best design schools in the country. And what did she do? She threw it away. She dropped out after 2 years. And why? Because she was chasing a boy, a useless, guitar-playing loser who left her 6 months later. She lost the money. She lost the degree. She came crawling back to us then, too, begging for a place to stay while she finished her credits at a community college." She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "That is who you are trusting with this estate," Elaine hissed. "A girl who throws away her future for a man. A girl who makes stupid, emotional decisions. You think she can manage a property? She could not even manage her own education. She is incompetent. She is weak. And she is just looking for someone to blame for her own pathetic life." The room went silent. Mark looked down at his shoes, unable to meet my gaze. Kelsey looked confused, as if she was hearing this for the first time. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. Shame is a powerful reflex. For years, that story had been my shame. I had made a mistake. I had been 19, in love, and incredibly naive. I had lost the scholarship. I had to work 2 jobs to pay for the rest of my degree. But as I looked at Elaine, standing there with her expensive purse and her counterfeit soul, the shame evaporated. I took a step forward. I did not look down. I did not cry. I looked her straight in the eye. "You are right," I said, my voice steady and clear. Elaine blinked, surprised by my admission. "I did lose that scholarship," I said, addressing the room. "I was 19 years old. I fell in love with the wrong person. And I made a terrible choice. I dropped out. I lost my funding." I paused, letting the words settle. "But here is the difference between you and me. Elaine," I continued, my voice hardening into steel. "When I lost that money, I didn't steal from my father to replace it. When I needed to pay for my tuition, I didn't forge someone else's signature on a loan application. I got a job. I worked double shifts at a diner. I paid for every single credit hour of my degree with my own sweat. I took out loans in my own name, and I paid them back, dollar by dollar." I took another step closer to her. "I made a mistake," I said, "but I owned it. I rebuilt my life from the ground up. I raised my daughter. I built a career. I did all of that without committing a single felony. Can you say the same?" Elaine opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The attack had backfired. Instead of painting me as incompetent, she had just highlighted the contrast between my honest struggles and her criminal shortcuts. Marissa stepped forward, closing her notebook with a sharp snap. "Thank you for that character assessment, Mrs. Hart," Marissa said coldly. "It is actually very useful. By bringing up Juliet's past mistakes in front of her child and her grandfather, You have just demonstrated a pattern of emotional abuse and a deliberate attempt to humiliate the victim. We will be adding a claim for intentional infliction of emotional distress to the civil suit. That should add another $50,000 to the settlement demand."
Elaine turned pale. She had played her ace, and it had turned out to be a joker. Mark, who had been standing silently by the fireplace, suddenly let out a sound that was half groan, half sob. His legs seemed to give out beneath him. He collapsed onto the cream-colored sofa, burying his face in his hands. "It is over, Elaine," Mark mumbled, his voice muffled by his palms. "Just stop, please."
"Mark!" Elaine shrieked. "Stand up! Do not let them talk to us like this." "I cannot do it anymore," Mark yelled. Looking up, his face was wet with tears, his eyes red and defeated. He looked at me, then at Marissa. "She made me do it," Mark blurted out. The room froze. "What did you say?" Marissa asked, her hand subtly moving to her phone to ensure the recording was clear. "Elaine," Mark said, pointing a trembling finger at his wife. "It was her idea. The loan, the signature. I told her it was dangerous. I told her Juliet would find out, but she said Juliet was too busy. She said Juliet trusted me too much to check." He looked at me, his expression a mask of pathetic desperation. "She told me you would never know. Juliet," Mark sobbed. "She said we would pay it back before you ever saw a statement. She said you owed us anyway, for raising you." "You coward!" Elaine screamed, lunging at him. "You spineless coward! You signed the papers. You walked into that bank." "Because you threatened to leave me," Mark shouted back, shrinking into the cushions of the sofa. "You told me if I did not get you the money for the condo, you would divorce me and take half of what was left. I did it for you." Marissa looked at me and nodded. We had it. The confession, the motive, the conspiracy, it was all there, spoken aloud in the presence of witnesses. Grandpa Harold, who had been watching the scene with the stoic calm of a judge, finally moved. He walked over to the sofa. He stood right in front of Mark, looking down at his son who was cowering on the Belgian linen. Harold reached out and placed his hand on the back of the sofa, right on the spot where the hidden safe lay concealed beneath the fabric. "Get up, Mark," Harold said quietly. Mark looked up, sniffing. "Dad." "I said get up," Harold commanded. "You are getting tears on the upholstery." Mark scrambled to his feet, moving away from his father. Harold kept his hand on the sofa. He looked at the cream-colored fabric, then at me. "For 7 years," Harold said, his voice raspy but strong. "This piece of furniture has been a weapon. You used it to make Juliet feel small. You used it to make her feel dirty. You told her she wasn't good enough to sit here without ruining it." He patted the backrest. "But you were wrong," Harold said. "This sofa wasn't a monument to your perfection. Elaine, it was a vault for your crimes. And today, it is the place where I take back my granddaughter's honor." He turned to me. "It is time, Juliet," he said. "Finish it." I looked at the three of them. Mark, broken and weeping. Elaine, seething with impotent rage. Kelsey, terrified and silent. I thought about the deal they had offered. Just let them go. Keep it quiet. Then I thought about the signature on the loan. I thought about the pawned necklace. I thought about the note that said, "Must kick the brat out." "No deals," I said. I turned to Marissa. "File everything," I said, my voice ringing with a finality that felt like a heavy door slamming shut. "Submit the audio recordings to the police. Submit the camera logs. Submit the forged contract. And give the district attorney the USB drive with the video of the assault." Elaine gasped. "Juliet, no, you cannot. It will ruin us." "You ruined yourselves," I said. "I am just turning on the lights." Marissa stepped forward, checking her watch. "You have 2 options," Marissa announced, her tone brisk and professional. "Option 1, you leave this house right now, you get in your car, and you drive away. You do not take anything other than the clothes on your backs and your personal toiletries. We will allow you to schedule a time next week, with police supervision, to retrieve your personal furniture. She paused. Option 2, Marissa continued. Juliet calls the police right now. We report an active trespassing situation involving individuals who have confessed to grand larceny and forgery. The officers will arrive in about 10 minutes. They will arrest you, you will be booked, and you will leave this house in the back of a squad car. She looked at Mark and Elaine. It is 11 o'clock, Marissa said. Make a choice. Mark wiped his face with his sleeve. He looked around the room he had ruled with fear for so long, and realized he was a stranger here. We are leaving, Mark whispered. No, Elaine shouted, stomping her foot. I am not leaving. This is my house. I picked out these curtains. I picked out this sofa. I am not going anywhere. Mark turned to her. For the first time in his life, he did not look at her with adoration or fear. He looked at her with exhaustion. He reached out and grabbed her arm. It wasn't gentle. It is over, Elaine, Mark said roughly. Do not make them call the cops. I am not going to jail today. Let go of me, Elaine screeched, trying to pull away. We are going, Mark said, dragging her toward the foyer. Get your purse. Kelsey, let us go. Kelsey did not need to be told twice. She grabbed her bag and bolted for the door, not looking back. Elaine struggled for a moment longer, but when she saw me pick up my phone and dial the first 2 digits of 911, the fight went out of her. She sagged against Mark, sobbing incoherently about her life being over. They walked to the door. Mark opened it, and the bright, uncompromising light of the midday sun flooded into the hallway. They stepped out. Marissa followed them to the porch to ensure they got into the car. I stayed in the living room. I felt a small hand slip into mine. I looked down. Emma was standing there. She had come down from her room when the shouting stopped. She was holding her stuffed rabbit, looking at the open door. Mommy, she whispered, are they coming back? I knelt down and pulled her into a hug, burying my face in her hair. I smelled her shampoo and the innocence that I had fought so hard to protect. No, baby, I said, my voice thick with emotion. They are not coming back. Do we have to leave too? She asked, her voice trembling. Is the bank going to take the house? I pulled back and looked into her eyes. I wiped a tear from her cheek. No, I said firmly. The bank is not taking anything. Grandpa Harold made sure of that. I stood up and picked her up, holding her on my hip. I looked around the room. It was quiet. The tension that had suffocated us for 3 years was gone, sucked out the door along with my stepmother. From now on, I told her, this is really our house. No one can tell us to be quiet. No one can tell us to leave. You can draw pictures on the fridge. We can get a dog. We can do whatever we want. Emma smiled, a genuine, relieved smile that lit up the room. Can we have pancakes for dinner? I laughed, a sound that felt rusty but real. Yes, we can have pancakes for dinner. Marissa walked back inside and closed the heavy oak door. She locked the deadbolt with a satisfying click. They are gone, Marissa said, letting out a long breath. I told them if they come within 500 feet of the property before the court date, I will have a restraining order issued so fast their heads will spin. She looked at me and smiled. You did good, Juliet. You held the line. I had help, I said, looking at Grandpa Harold. He was still standing by the sofa. He looked tired, incredibly old, but his eyes were peaceful. He was staring at the cream-colored sectional. Well, Harold said, tapping the cushion with his cane. It is done. The filth is gone. He looked at me. If you want, Juliet, we can call a hauler. We can have this thing dragged out to the curb today. I will buy you a new one, a blue one, or maybe a nice floral pattern, something that does not remind you of them. I looked at the sofa. I looked at the spot where the wine had spilled 7 years ago. I looked at the open panel in the back where the safe was exposed. I looked at the pristine Belgian linen that Elaine had loved more than she loved me. It was just wood and fabric, but it was also a battlefield. No, Grandpa, I said slowly. I walked over and ran my hand along the armrest. It felt cool and solid.
I do not want to throw it away, I said. Why on earth not? Harold asked, raising an eyebrow. It is ugly, and it has bad memories.
I smiled, and for the first time, I felt like the true mistress of the house.
Because I won, I said. I want to keep it. I want to sit on it every morning and drink my coffee. I want to remember that they tried to use this sofa to crush me, but instead, it became the reason they lost everything.
I sat down on the center cushion, right where Elaine had sat during her interrogation. I leaned back, crossing my legs. It was comfortable.
It is not their sofa anymore, I said. It is my trophy. Grandpa Harold chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that turned into a laugh.
Fair enough, my dear. Fair enough. He sat down in his armchair. Emma climbed up next to me on the sofa, bouncing a little on the cushions. It is bouncy, she giggled.
It is perfect, I said.
I looked at the empty space where Mark and Elaine used to loom over us. The air was clear, the sun was shining, and for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Home. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and I truly hope you enjoyed seeing justice served in Maple Creek. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please drop a comment below and let me know which part of the world you are listening from. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button to support us, and press the hype button to help this story reach even more people.